Good morning, everybody. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Let me make sure the volume is correct. There we are. That's better. I hope you guys are doing okay this morning. It is Monday morning. Monday mornings are always rough. I think pretty much universal, everybody. Unless you just don't work, have a huge expense account, and you can just sit at home eating bonbons. But everybody else, us, typically have to work. So if you're under this voice, thank you for being under this voice. And we're going to have a damn good show for you today. In fact, we should have a damn good show for you all week. At the very least, the elements of the week that have been planned up to this point. I was not able to get Brian Berletic on the show. Hopefully he can be on by the end of the month, though. That being said, we still have a really good show for you today. We're going to start off with Tim Anderson. Now, the reason I wanted to start off with Tim is because everyone that has come onto the show that I've spoken to has made the point that Qatar, all of this is theater. And I got to be honest with you, I don't know if all of this is theater. Qatar really seemed to have taken umbrage. Now, there are two ways of thinking about this. A, the U.S. doesn't care about these states. And because the U.S. doesn't care about these states, it's perfectly fine letting Israel hit Qatar, which is what I fully believe took place. That for all intents and purposes, Israel wanted to hit Qatar. The U.S. was fine with them doing it, and they did it. I don't believe for a moment that Donald Trump wasn't aware of what was taking place, especially with the abnormalities around air defense and everything else. So there's that. The other question is, did Qatar know about it? And is all of this just theatrics of a country trying to, let's say, tamp down on a lot of the anger and whatnot that's going to be in a population after them just getting hit by a genocidal maniac country? Again, there's no way to know as a flat fact. Trump said he told them. Qatar said he did not, or at the very least didn't tell them whether they could do anything about it. You pick your pony on that. The other interesting question is, what are they going to do about it? Now, the rub is, the moment that you've been hit in such a way, your sovereignty is up in smoke, especially if you have no response to the fact that you've been hit by a terrorist state. And so Qatar has made a huge amount of noise saying, we're not going to take this. We must respond. We must respond. We take umbrage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They've gone so far to call an emergency council with the OIC, the Organization of Islam, basically Arab Islamic Republics. Iran is also there, Persian, so not Arab, but there are Islamic. And so they have all of these states convening in Doha. It took place yesterday, and it's supposed to also take place again today, trying to formulate a strategy in regards to what to do, because they have come to the assessment that A, the U.S. is not going to protect us, period. If Israel wants to hit us, they're going to hit us. And regardless of what Donald Trump says, Israel has already said, we will do this again. So there's that. Two, it's humiliating, deeply humiliating, for a country that is committing a genocide in one case, invading and occupying nations in another case, meaning Syria, Lebanon, etc., to go after you now when you thought you were something special and you thought you were something different. For some reason, Qatar thought it was in a glass vase. Not so much. And so Israel is openly talking about greater Israel at this point. And so all of these states on some level know that their borders are questionable for as long as this genocidal entity acts with impunity, and for as long as the United States effectively allows them to do so, because it's effectively the U.S. that's pushing them. I don't know if they're pushing them, but at the very least, they have the U.S. consent. Even Egypt in this, and they were talking about this kind of Arab Islamic NATO of sorts. I am very skeptical of all of this, by the way. To me, it's show me, don't tell me, because I don't believe you if you're just telling me anything on this front. Show me, do something. Whatever you're going to do something. And then I have something to actually discuss and analyze. Up to this point, we're just stuck in this position of they seem to be very angry. Their feelings seem to be hurt. They seem to be shocked by the whole thing. And will they have any kind of response to it, or will they just vassal harder? I don't know. I suppose we're going to find out at the end of this meeting that's supposed to take place today. Again, I'm very skeptical. These guys have been vassals for a very long time. And being vassals dependent upon the U.S. Now, this could have been a major faux pas by the U.S. if indeed they decide that they need to hitch their wagon or hitch their tent to a different wagon. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how long that takes. I don't know what that looks like politically in doing so. But the moment that you find out that you are no longer safe, then what? Then what? They may be vassals, but there may be extents and levels to the degree of vassalization, I don't know if that's the word for it, that a country is willing to accept, especially if the entire premise of it was, we are safe, and you realize you are not. So we'll see. When I talk to people who are outside of government, I usually get different answers than people who are inside government. They look at it differently. It's like they've been in the machine, so they come to a different assessment on how things are operating and how things are working. I have an open mind with this stuff. And put it this way. When I come to a conclusion, I usually make a video about the conclusion that I've come to. I don't think I've made a video on this yet. So my conclusions, I'm open-minded to it. I am of the mind that, yeah, they got hit, obviously. B, they're vassals, and for whatever particular reason, they were shocked by getting hit. Whether they knew in advance of that, I have no idea. And whether they're going to respond to it or not, again, I have no idea what that response will be, if indeed they do. But up to this point, everybody that's come onto the show has effectively pointed out they believe no response is coming. The other, what time is it? Okay, we have time. The other big story that is interesting is this. This is Trump. Listen to what Trump says here. And I'm going to piggyback this with a letter that Donald Trump sent to NATO countries. I would imagine Istanbul included.
Europe has to get together and do it. Look, Europe they're my friends, but they're buying oil from Russia. So we can't be expected to be the only ones that are, full bore. But Europe is buying oil from Russia. I don't want them to buy oil. And the sanctions that they're putting on are not tough enough. And I'm willing to do sanctions, but they're going to have to toughen up their sanctions commensurate with what I'm doing. Just to clarify, you wouldn't move ahead.
Now, what Donald Trump is saying here is pretty amazing. And what it seems like is Trump is annoyed. That's what it comes across as. You are continuously asking daddy, me, to do all of these things to Russia. You want me to pass sanctions. You want me to put in troops. You want to get the world into potentially a third world war. You want a political backstop or military backstop. You want all of these things from me. You want me to do all of this stuff. And yet you're still buying Russian oil. You haven't put a certain amount into NATO, et cetera, et cetera. And if in the back of Trump's mind is, I am sick of this situation in general, he is telling them, in effect, you need to stop using Russian oil and gas, period, fully. You need to sanction China immediately. And you need to do so to the tune of like 100%. When you do that, then I'll get involved. Until you're ready to do that, leave me to my devices. You're wasting my time. He literally said in the letter, you are wasting my time. You're wasting America's time and money. Now, Europe can't do that. They can't do that. He's asking them to do something that they can't fundamentally do. And again, some of these countries are his friends, Fico, Orban, who have been using Russian oil and gas the entire way through. Are they going to do it? Probably not. Can Europe really afford to hit China with 100% sanctions? Can they really afford to stop using oil coming from Saudi Arabia that came from Russia, India that came from Russia? Can they really do that? I mean, the French economy is already in a tailspin. The UK economy is already in a tailspin. Germany is already being deindustrialized. Do they really have the capability of doing what Donald Trump is asking them to do? And if Trump knows that they can't do it, then this is effectively a bluff. But just think how subservient Europe has been up to this point. What if they call his bluff? It's interesting. I hear my guest here. Let me go to him. We are joined with Tim Anderson. Tim, how you doing, man? You doing okay tonight?
Hi, Jamal. Thanks. Yeah, just recovering from a bit of jet lag.
Oh, yes. Oh, well, can we? Okay, I'm not gonna bring it up. I never know whether I can mention the stuff
Okay.
on the show. Okay. But I'm glad you're back, and I'm glad you're back safely. And yeah, you're what, 6-7 hours in regards to the location. So yeah. Tim Anderson, he's a writer, internationalist, academic, director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies. And you can find him, counter-hegemonic studies, that site. Tim, I am super excited that you are with me, because I'm also looking for a little bit of insight. So, of course, we're still dealing with the ramifications of Israel's attack on Doha, murdering several Hamas members, apparently murdering another Qatari that was there. So Qatar comes out and says this. Now, just to be clear, they are also having a meeting with, I think they call it the OIC, Organization of basically Muslim Arab States. Yeah. And so Iran is also at this particular meeting. Egypt is at this meeting. They have Saudi Arabia, et cetera, et cetera. All of these groups are there. And all of them are trying to come to some kind of consensus on some kind of, let's say, strategy or plan in order to push back on Israel. Now that they seem to have come to an assessment that they are talking about greater Israel openly, we are all subject to attack. The United States in no way is going to step in and rein in his dog. And we need to do something for ourselves, since we know that the U.S. is not going to, let's say, fulfill the bargain of oil for protection. So this is Prime Minister making his initial statement. If I can flip this over, there we are. This is him making his initial statement, effectively saying something needs to be done. We can't allow this to go unresponded to.
Article 4, and within this context, we express our appreciation to the Arab states who condemned this Israeli barbaric attack and their support to the lawful measures we will take to safeguard our sovereignty. Attacking Qatar's sovereignty is a violation of the UN Charter, namely Article 4, prohibits the use of force against countries and its sovereignty. It is also a flagrant violation of the international norms and humanitarian tenets. It cannot be an isolated incident that can go unpunished.
I'm fascinated by this, that A, they're still talking about international law. Israel's committing a genocide, and these guys are like, hey, this is breaking international law. B, Syria has, the Gulf states have given all sorts of money, billions of dollars, to overthrow the Syrian government, which, again, also breaches international law. He didn't necessarily care about it in that context. And we've watched Israel kill, murder, rape, occupy Syria, occupy Lebanon. They're doing the occupation of Lebanon and Syria right now, demanding territory from both. But he seems legitimately outraged on the fact that his country was personally attacked. I think give me an overall take as we step into this.
I think that's because they didn't expect. After all, Qatar hosts the biggest U.S. military base in the whole region, right? Now they expected they were going to be safe behind all of the air defense that the U.S. has, and Qatar has too. And Qatar pays a lot of money to the U.S. for whatever it has, but they were all switched off that time. And what the Israelis attacked was a residential area of Doha, whereas what the Iranians attacked in retaliation for the US attack on Iran was some radar installations within the military base. So the Israelis went much further. They were betrayed by Trump as well as attacked by the Israelis, and they didn't expect this because, pardon me, both the Israelis and the US had asked them to host talks with Hamas. So there's a huge amount of betrayal, genuine anger, because they really thought that it can't happen to us. They'll attack other people, but not us. And now it sent a message to all of the oil-rich monarchies or the petro-monarchies in the Persian Gulf that you're not safe by hosting U.S. bases. The Emirates have had some planes there and so on. So all of them have been very close collaborators with the U.S., but Qatar the most, basically. And so I think the anger is genuine on the one hand. Of course, the hypocrisy is clear, as you pointed out. It's mainly Qatar that was funding the HTS regime, which is now in power in Damascus, basically. So for many years through Turkey, and that regime in Damascus is now saying its main enemies are Iran and Hezbollah, nicely, coincidentally, the same enemies as the Israelis. But now, of course, you see what's happened is that a little bit like the Saudi attack on Qatar in 2017, which was really a war of jealousy really between them, because Qatar is part of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a secret society which has power in Turkey with Mr. Erdogan and in Qatar, and briefly they had a Muslim Brotherhood president in Egypt. And the core of the Syrian insurrection back in 2011 was really Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, then supported by internationalist jihadis from all different countries, basically. So when that happened in 2017, it was Iran that gave asylum effectively to Qatar in terms of finance, in terms of airspace and so on. And then there was, in other words, Qatar was pushed into the arms of Iran back then when the Saudis, when MBS in Saudi Arabia attacked them. And now it's happened again, basically, because the Israelis attacked Iran in June, and now they're attacking Qatar. So the Iranians are are on a diplomatic offensive, expressing their solidarity with Qatar. And Qatar is also warning the other Gulf states of their vulnerability. The Emirates have already cancelled the Israeli participation in the Dubai Air Show in November, and Qatar is trying to pressure them to close the embassy in the Emirates. The Emirates has, in the meantime, been kicking out many Shia Muslims from the Emirates, fearing that they're going to cause problems for the Iranians through their sympathies with Hezbollah. So there's been a purge in the Emirates, but now it's thrown things up in the air, and there's a lot of anxiety in these Persian Gulf monarchies, where people thought they were safe from the fallout of this war. They thought it was all going on between Israel and Iran and not them.
Do you think they're going to do anything? Is the interesting question to me. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they don't want to act singularly. They seem to we want everybody to be involved in any action that takes place.
Yes.
Egypt has went so far as to say that they want a NATO-style arrangement with the other countries in the region. What do you think this response is going to be, and do you think these countries are going to come to some consensus on a response?
Well, Qatar was a non-NATO member, but ally, and so had some sort of status in NATO terms, because precisely it's the biggest base in the region. It's the center of CENTCOM. The Pentagon is supposed to control the whole of West Asia, most of the Middle East from Qatar, basically, and attacks on countries could be launched from there, as well as from Diego Garcia with the long-range bombers. So I don't think Qatar is in very deep. They are Muslim Brotherhood. That's why they had links with some of the Palestinian resistance groups when they were Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas has really broken from the Muslim Brotherhood and sided back to the resistance. That's why its main sponsor is Iran these days. That was a controversial move when they broke from Iran back in 2012. But that's all changed. Nevertheless, as I said, Hamas was hosting these talks in Doha at the request of the Israelis and the US, because the US felt if we don't have one of our allies or collaborators, then Hamas is only going to be have relations with Iran. It's going to be all through Iran, basically. So they didn't want Iran to have that monopoly of contact, and now we see that they've used it. They've used this office of negotiations to box them in and try and kill them all. So how many people have they betrayed? Of course, they betrayed Hamas, they betrayed Qatar, and they've sent a strong message to the other collaborators that no one is safe there, basically. So it will tend to push them into a more friendly position with Iran and with Iran's allies. But I don't think Qatar is going to break out, but it's going to look for some sort of support, of course. It's already pushing certainly the Emirates in that direction. They don't always see things eye to eye, but nevertheless, they're both part of the Gulf Council, the GCC, and it'll have an effect on the members of the GCC, who are normally very staunch US. I hesitate to say allies, because they're not really allies, but they're allied to the US in some subordinate sort of way. It will make them be more cautious about their collaboration. I'll try and back off a little bit. Even the Emirates did it when there was some attacks on Yemen, and the Emirates didn't want the US airplanes in the Emirates. I think they kicked them out to Qatar because they didn't want the Yemenis to be firing back at them again. The Yemeni can hit the Emirates with their missiles. So you can see that they tend to back off. They try and reposition themselves so that they won't be a target. That's certainly going to happen. I mean, they've all been collaborating with Israel, all of these Gulf monarchies. It's just that only some of them have come out openly, Bahrain and the Emirates, to formally recognize under the Abraham Accords. But the Saudis have been intervening to help them intercept missiles from Yemen and from Iran and so on. Jordan has been doing the same sort of thing, So they're all of those subordinate Arab regimes who consider themselves allies of the US have been doing their bit to help the Israelis, but now they see that that's not going to give them any guarantee of security.
Yeah. So Donald Trump, apparently the prime minister on the head, said, hey, this won't happen again. I'll make sure of it. And as I keep pointing out, you have to trust the man that led people into waiting, effectively led them through negotiations, or this idea of negotiations, and murdered them during attempted negotiations. Same thing with Soleimani, same thing with Iran, where they tried to decapitation strike. So I would imagine they don't, that's worth nothing.
No,
also,
and he lied to them about that attack because he said it was Israel and he didn't have advance notice, and everyone knows he did because the US, which is a huge military base there, switched off its air defense. Otherwise, the air defense from the US and from Qatar would have been shooting at those Israeli planes.
Was this a strategic mistake by the US and by Israel? I mean, Israel is openly talking about Greater Israel at this point, which by definition means that many of these states, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all of these states would have to give up territory for Israel to get their quote unquote Greater Israel. It's pretty ballsy to just come out and admit that. Like, they feel very confident at this point.
Yeah, they're emboldened. The Israelis are emboldened by Trump in particular because he's really removed the mask, hasn't he, really? I mean, with Biden was supporting the genocide, everyone knows that, but there was always this rhetoric, sort of facade of rhetoric and talk about rules-based orders and things like this, and Trump has thrown all that to one side, and no one knows exactly, how far it's going to go, but the Israelis are talking much more openly. Even under Biden, there was an official under Biden who was saying similar things to Netanyahu, basically, and now some of the emissaries of Trump are talking about, with contempt, about as Trump did in his first term, really with contempt about the Gulf monarchies, that they provide money to us and, they wouldn't exist if we weren't protecting them, these sorts of things. So it's been, and that's why Biden couldn't get the Emiratis to pump more fuel for him when there was a fuel shortage after they'd sanctioned Russia, after Iran and after Venezuela, so really Washington has been painting itself into a corner, but the rhetoric from Washington and the Israelis has become much more crude. And much more openly hostile, not just to their traditional enemies, but to these other Arab regimes, that really, I think Netanyahu is saying, we'll push them around and then we'll get them to agree to things and then we'll hit them over the head, So the betrayal is spoken about more openly because of this arrogance, because if you keep getting away with anything, I mean, the Israelis have attacked they've bombed 10 countries in a week, was it? 10 countries? If you include Malta and Tunisia bombing the fleet, and now Qatar and Yemen and Syria, they're bombing the air defense that Erdogan has been giving to Jolani in Syria, so there's an extraordinary level of violence and uncertainty in the region, and it's making the most conservative or the most reactionary of those regimes think twice about getting further into bed with this strategy. That they'll want to save their ass basically and back out if they can to a safe position, if there is a safe position.
Yeah, see, and this is where I think I disagree with some of my guests, because some of my guests take this position. They're not going to do anything. These guys are vassals. They're going to vassal harder. They're not going to respond in any particular way. And I think the thing for me is like, yeah, but it has been made very clear through Netanyahu's speeches, we're going to do this again. Through underlings of Netanyahu, we're going to do this again. Netanyahu is very clear. Anywhere that we believe that there is somebody who we want to murder, we will do so.
They're talking about attacking Turkey too. They're talking about attacking Turkey, yeah. Yep,
exactly my point. Like, meaning the moment that you're aware of that as a country, regardless, even if you're a vassal, and you're aware, okay, we could be hit at any moment. Any of us, all of us. The map of Greater Israel goes through our countries. Okay, maybe we should do something. Meaning,
Turkey is a NATO member, remember, and that's an interesting dilemma for NATO. But also Qatar has this associate membership, basically. So effectively, if you talk about Ukraine being a dilemma for NATO, how are they going to react if a NATO member, Turkey, they've already attacked these defense installations that Turkey was giving to Jolani. So effectively, NATO is being drawn into this one too by the Israelis, but the Israelis have been considered more or less European and some sort of associate member of NATO too. So it's not, of course, NATO does what Washington says, so Washington will just give the Israelis a blank check. But basically, I think it was a representative of Biden that was saying not too long ago that the Israelis are going to be, the region's going to be swept, and the Israelis are going to be the overwhelming hegemon in the entire region, which is what Condoleezza Rice was saying almost 20 years ago when she made those statements about using creative chaos to reshape the region, basically. But it's coming out in the open more just under the Trump administration, I guess. And Netanyahu likes that.
Well, and therein lies the rub. I mean, the fact that they know this, on some level, I would imagine that, meaning it's one thing if you are a vassal and you feel comfortable in your status. We're protected. We're somehow different than these other countries that are being destroyed and murdered. When that reality is shattered, and shattered, brimmingly shattered, like just clear as day shattered, then what? And doesn't that on some level inspire these countries to do something different because their safety is no longer a guarantee in any of this anymore? Meaning the entire premise by which they were operating has just gone up in smoke, and very clearly gone up in smoke. Do you think they will respond? Like, meaning,
yes,
even
they
if
will.
it's not
They have already by having this meeting, this summit in Doha. I was passing through there as it happens, but I didn't actually see it or participate in it. But they've already done it, and they're going to look for some other options. They'll look for greater cooperation with some other Muslim countries, and they'll look for greater cooperation with Iran. And that's going to slow down the rhythm of these wars that's going on, basically. You know, the Israelis haven't got it all their own way. They're talking about a second attack on Iran, but I think that's been delayed because there's so many people that they're attacking, and their capabilities are not that great. They're depending on foreign shipment of arms and so on, just as you could say in a parallel way to the Ukrainian situation. You know, they wouldn't exist if they weren't getting this outside support. But nevertheless, you know, they have ambitions to do all sorts of things. They want to attack Lebanon again. They want to attack Iraq. They want to eliminate the Yemeni threat. And they're talking about going back to Qatar, you know, to finish off the lead negotiators in Hamas. They didn't manage to kill. Basically, they killed the son of one of them and the security guard and some other people in the delegation, but the main people they didn't kill. So they want to do all sorts of things, and they're talking about eliminating what they call the Iranian proxies in the region before they move back to Iran again. So my sense is that there was a lot of a growing consensus amongst analysts that they were going to move on a second attack on Iran soon, maybe this month, but that may be delayed now because they're still having trouble restocking all of those air defenses, and they've got so many other battles going on the side, and they're worried about getting hit from the side by Iran's allies if they go for Iran again, which stretches them. Of course, that's the one that stretches them the most, Iran, because Iran can hit back and hurt them, basically. And that's when they're vulnerable to the other resistance. You know, in Iraq, the resistance, to some extent in Lebanon, certainly in Yemen, there's a great possibility that they can be outflanked if they attempt another attack on Iran, and Iran manages to damage more of their infrastructure and more of their munitions.
But they never did that, though. Like, those other entities never got involved in fact, none of them got involved.
Iran asked them not to on the last occasion because Iran was talking about this gradual incremental increase in the munitions that they were using. Basically, it was a sort of diplomatic maneuver. Basically, they've been telling them now we've got a new generation of missiles and so on. So they asked the Yemenis specifically not to intervene at that time. But if the circumstances change, it'll be different. And Iran has been, the military commanders have been saying, you know, we're gradually turning up the temperature, and if they try it again, we're going to come in harder, basically. And come in harder may mean that they're going to have volleys coming from the side as well.
What do the Gulf states have to lose in their relationship with the U.S. at this point? I mean, they're not at war with Iran. They're not even in competition in the sense of, you know, Iranian proxies going after these countries. So this notion of needing protection for oil doesn't necessarily seem to apply. And protection at this point is off the table in real terms. So what do they have to lose by
protection means something very different to the US and its worldview and CENTCOM than it does to them, basically. Of course, let's remember the Emirates are already in BRICS. The Saudis have an invitation to BRICS, but they haven't joined yet. Right. Iran's in BRICS, you know, so they've got of course, the Saudis want access to the Chinese market and the Emiratis too. So, so there's those markets. But they, you're right. They're boxed in many respects. They can't, and they fear. I think they fear Washington. They always fear Washington. To some extent, the Israelis do too, because the Israelis are emboldened because they think we managed to attack Iran directly and we survived the counterattack and we got Washington to join in at the end. And even though they got hurt and they got a lot of things damaged, there's this sense that they achieved some of their goals there, basically. But
Right.
you know, the Israelis still, they have this fear in the background. There's always been this paranoia that at one time the US is not going to be there for them, basically. As you know, for example, remember with Georgia, what was it, back in 2008 when the Georgian president, whatever his name was, attacked Russia over some breakaway sections there,
Yes.
and expected George Bush to get involved, and Bush said, no, you're on your own, basically.
Yeah.
So the Israelis always have this background fear, even though Biden backed them up, even though Trump backed them up, there's still this fear that if things get really tough, you know, where's Big Brother, basically. So they have that sort of fear. And of course, that's a much greater fear with the Gulf monarchies, you know, basically, because I think we don't want to be in the crossfire between Yemen or Israel and Iran, for example. But they could well be, and because they all host US facilities in some respects, and the Iranians are going to attack those facilities and try to avoid too many US casualties, because the Iranians don't want a big pretext for massive retaliation by the US. So you see, that's why they're treading cautiously in a sense, because they don't want to. No one wants escalation. No serious person wants escalation in a war, basically. So on the times when they've retaliated against the US, it's been at facilities. And remember the second strike that Iran did on Israelis, it was only at their facilities, and now they're actually hitting things. They haven't been killing as many people as Israelis did. I was in Iran just recently, and they took us to see the houses of the nuclear scientists who were killed in the first day of that attack back in June, basically. And what they did was effectively demolish a whole apartment block and killed a man and his whole family, and then about 4 or 5 or 6 neighbors as well. So it was a devastating, you know, brutal attack on people who were civil servants, you know, scientists, basically, because they were linked in some way to the nuclear program. The Israelis just thought they could go and murder them, basically. So they can do that. That sort of crossfire can happen to the Gulf monarchies too. They all have some sort of US facilities there.
No, I get that part. I guess what I'm asking, God, that brings up 2 points. If everything Iran did up to this point has shown itself to create the context by which Israel attacks them and go for decimation strikes. I mean, Israel was trying to murder human beings. Yeah. Iran was trying to have this kind of ethical war. Has their strategy been somewhat of a faux pas? I mean, Israel's looking at this kind of like, these guys are weak. They are, we won. I think they still have this idea that they won in all of this. Yeah. And the Gulf monarchies, I guess my thing is, they have no natural enemies in that region short of Israel. Iran is not trying to attack them. So what is the protection that they're getting out of this?
Well, Iran has threatened to destroy the oil facilities in the Gulf, let's remember, and put a blockade on the Gulf. So their economies are under threat in that sort of way. So it's not that easy for them. They're worried about that. They're worried about their economies being damaged. Of course, even when Iran acts in a more gentlemanly manner, they let Qatar know, for example, hours in advance when they were striking the Israelis, so that Qatar could cancel the flights there. I happened to be traveling through the Gulf at that time, and all the Qatar flights were cancelled for a few hours in the morning, basically, and then they came back on in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, Iran was very civilized in that sort of way, you know, old school rules of war type of thing. Whereas the Israelis do sneak attacks, as they did on Qatar, you know, so sneak attacks, and then they kill civilians, and they attack residential civilian areas, and then they say, you know, of course they lie about it, basically. But things are not that simple. I think there's a great deal of nervousness in the Gulf at the moment. The Emirates obviously didn't want the Israeli military in Dubai in November, pardon me.
Right.
But so they cancelled that there, even though beforehand they were being very protective of the Israeli presence in Dubai, but it's caused problems for them, a lot of social problems for them there. So there's some response already going on. I don't know whether they're going to close the Israeli consulate. It might be a symbolic thing they would do. Qatar is pressing them to do that. Pardon me. I've got
You're fine. You're fine.
So I think they're going to respond in some sorts of ways. And it's significant that the OIC had the meeting in Qatar, because you've got these other important states, you know, Malaysia and Indonesia and so on, that have some weight in the world. And it's going to harden their position, basically, and as I said, drive them into the arms of Iran too. So that'll be a problem for the US, because the US, with its so-called sanctions, unilateral coercive measures, they're really attempts to isolate their targets, and principally it's been Iran, because Iran is the biggest, even though a lot of people in the West don't understand it. Iran is the biggest by far partner of the Palestinian resistance, and really it's likely that the Palestinian people would not exist if they hadn't had this constant support for 47 years. 46 years from Iran, basically. So that accounts for all of the propaganda about Iran from the Israelis since at least the 90s, if not the 80s. It was the Israelis who were pushing for the invasion of Iraq and all the rest of it, and now they pushed the Australians recently into breaking relations with Iran on completely fake pretexts. So
Right.
they're the ones that have been pushing this, and of course Washington is on the same page when it comes to trying to isolate the rivals to Israeli hegemony in the region, which is what they want.
I would like to show you an article. You flagged this on your own channel, and I think it's interesting. So this is by the Cradle. Goodbye, War on Terror. Hello, War on Arab Sovereignty.
Yeah, very good article.
Yeah, the Cradle does really good work.
Yeah,
So
Ali Ahmad, I think he's based in Turkey, but he's working for some think tanks. Yeah, very good overview of the change in the strategy of the US.
Yeah, so effectively he's making the argument like the war on terror is effectively over, and this notion of having these sovereign monarchs, that is in question, that is no longer a given in the way that it was given prior. And the attack that took place on Doha is kind of a warning of sorts, or a new norm in the way of operations in regards to Washington and Israel. Israel is going to be the dominant force in the region. The other countries are going to be subordinate powers to Israeli dominance. Give me your take on that. Is that effectively what I think that Doha attack was indicating?
And he's saying that, well, the war on terror was always a nonsense anyway, really. I mean, what's a war on the adjectival noun? What does that even mean? The greatest terrorists in the region are the Israelis, basically, and the US has been funding that for decades, but what he's saying is that this idea that there's going to be some attempt to, which is the pretext for most US interventions across West Asia and North Africa. In North Africa, we've got the similar sort of thing going on with Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab and so on. These are Salafi Wahhabi groups funded by these Gulf monarchies, basically, because the ideology of Wahhabism comes from Saudi Arabia and the Salafists, similarly, with this very sectarian fanaticism. It's being used to divide and rule people, and then the US comes in and says, we'll help you fight terrorism. Remember, that's how they got back into, US military got back into Iraq, even though the Iraqis have been trying to get them out, in recent years. And apparently there's some moves happening at the moment. I don't know how secure they are, but Iraq is suffering under this occupation still, after more than 20 years after the invasion. So, the article is saying very credibly that there's no attempt to talk about creating stability in the region by eliminating terrorism. Now, it's about, they want a network of entirely weak states. They don't want any strong Arab regime. And that's what they did in Syria. They got rid of a relatively strong, although, weakened by years of war and siege and so on. They got rid of a relatively stable regime, and inclusive, I might add, regime. And they put an ISIS commander in charge, and then invited him to New York to talk to the United Nations almost on the anniversary of 9/11, when everyone still thinks it was Al-Qaeda that attacked the Twin Towers there. So they want to destabilize all the countries like Syria and have a weak network. That's the only way that a small entity like the Israelis could possibly dominate the region. Mm-hmm. And that article by Ali Ahmadi makes it very clear. I think it's a very good perspective, actually, that it's a shift, at least in their rhetoric. Perhaps they always wanted that anyway, because, of course, the textbook is really Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard from the 90s, which is about destroying nodes of power around the world. Particularly talks about Eurasia and Europe, but they mean the Middle East, West Asia as well. So Ali Ahmadi's article just spells it out that really they don't want any strong Arab regime, any strong Arab nationalist or any other sort of regime is going to be a threat to them, basically. So that means they're going to make them all pathetic, weak, divided or warring little entities like they did with Libya and then Syria. Mm. And that includes allies, so-called allies.
Well, I hope they know that. That's the fascinating part to me, that they thought they were special. They thought they were different. Yeah. They're not. I mean, you have a country that's been murdering Arabs for years. And for whatever reason, it's like, oh, but we're special in all of this. And then they take umbrage the moment that they get hit. I'm fascinated by that dynamic, to be honest.
Well, it works at home, doesn't it? You know, someone gets killed in the US and everyone's talking about it for ages and ages. And meantime, another 50 children are killed, you know, almost every day in Gaza, and it goes off the front pages, doesn't it? And one local murder takes its place.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's almost like the world got used to the genocide. It's like, yeah, this takes place every day, but man, Doha doesn't get hit every day. So we need to talk about this. We need to make this a big deal. No, you're absolutely right. It's just fascinating the way it's transpired. I mean, if you're sitting somewhere looking on the moon and you're just kind of looking at events and you're like, wow, that country has impunity to do whatever it wants. And then it uses that same impunity to do whatever it wants.
It keeps going.
Yeah, and they're shocked by it.
Unless they get punished, unless they get slapped down in some way, they keep doing it and they keep growing it. Yeah.
But they never get punished and they never get slapped down. And I'm unaware of any entity that is willing to do that, short of. Let me ask you this: if Doha gets hit again, will they respond militarily at that point?
No, I don't think they're capable of it, because obviously the US military has its hands on the switches. Otherwise, they're air defense. I mean, Qatar has air defense as well as the US base in Qatar. You know, it's separate. They didn't activate it at all. So, pardon me. However, whether by remote control or whatever, their air defense was switched off, and they could have hit anyone there, basically. And they did actually hit anyone. I imagine they haven't talked about it. They talked about one Qatari security guard, but what about all the neighbors when they hit residential buildings? In Iran, I saw there was almost equal number of neighbors killed when they went in to murder one scientist, you know, and family members and so on.
So, yeah. So at the end of the day, all of this is talk. It's Qatar trying to find allies, trying to get friends, trying to get other people involved.
Well, they will look for support elsewhere. They will look for some refuge somewhere else. The first place they're going to look is Iran. The first place they're going to look is Iran, because Iran has helped them. Qatar hasn't responded very helpfully, because they, of course, funded the terrorists that overthrew Iran's ally in Syria. But nevertheless, Iran diplomatically is very accommodating in that sort of way. They're very clever. They did give refuge to Qatar, even though the Qatari media, you know, they ran terrible things about Shia Muslims, really like genocidal sectarian stuff by some people they put on Al Jazeera. It was awful stuff. But nevertheless, when Qatar was in trouble, the Iranians in 2017, the Iranians accommodated them and supported them in some way. And now they came out of that crisis with their big brother, the Saudis, you know, and supposedly they're working together again. But
you know, it's funny. I was in Qatar when they were bombing Qatar.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't on purpose. My ex-wife and I were traveling. We just so happened to land in Doha. We were in I think it was like a 12-15 hour overlap where we just kind of toured. And when talking to the cab driver, he was talking about how there was bombing on the outskirts. There was an issue between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And yeah, it was fascinating to be, you know, part of that. One last question on this: are negotiations off? I mean, there's no way that Qatar is going to be suckered into having additional negotiations under this model where they realize they're not safe, or are they?
Well, Hamas is going to think twice about it, obviously. That's the first thing. I mean, Hamas has other options, basically. But the reason they were in Qatar was that the US didn't want Iran to have a monopoly on hosting Qatar, you know, and it's going to be, of course, you know, the Israelis got away with murdering some people with Iran without too much retaliation. But nevertheless, they certainly have greater protection. There are Hamas people in Iran, and they have greater protection there. So Hamas will think twice about that. Because the Israelis have already said arrogantly that they're going to go back and try and finish them off, because they failed, basically. They failed to destroy the negotiating team. It seems like they want some trophy to hold up, because in the past they were saying that the analysts were saying the Israelis want to hit Iran again and pretend that they've destroyed its nuclear facilities before October the 7th, before their anniversary, because Netanyahu's looking for some sort of trophy to hold up and say, look what we've achieved with all this endless war. We know, everyone knows Netanyahu has to keep the war going in some way, but he wants something to hold up, and the destruction of the entire Hamas leadership. They won't do really, because they won't do that even because on the field, they've recruited as many young people as they've lost in the last decade. I think the US military admitted that some months ago, basically, that they'd lost many fighters. They'd lost perhaps more than 15,000 fighters, but they recruited the same numbers again. And the same goes for Islamic Jihad and the Popular Front and the Fatah armed groups too. So, but the leadership, it's some sort of symbolic thing that Netanyahu's reaching to try and say, look, we got rid of all of the big known leaders of Hamas, and here's something to hold up to try and support his image that he's actually achieving something. Because the Israelis are weary of the war too. You know, it's hurting them, and if they get another volley from Iran, there'll be some serious crying going on.
Are they overstretched?
They are overstretched, but they're, of course, they're overstretched. I mean, they're only going on with these offensive because the US and Britain, which of course logistically supported that attack. You know, have you seen the flights that the British had refueling aircraft circling Qatar at that time, and the Trump obviously knew about it because I said they switched off all the air defenses around the US base, which is on the it's not near Doha, it's on the outskirts, so it's a fair distance from Doha with different air defense there, basically. So they know that they were involved. The Germans seem to be pulling back a little bit on their supply of weapons, but you don't know how much of it is doublespeak, really. But a number of the Europeans are now saying, Spain is saying, maybe Slovenia, but the big suppliers like Germany are starting to talk about pulling back the weapons while the slaughter's going on in Gaza, basically. So all of this scandal is having some impact on their sponsors, but nevertheless, the US and the UK are the core of it, basically. What the Israelis care most are the Anglo-Americans who were their, mother and father and their ongoing sponsors, basically. And the propaganda war, of course, in the English-speaking media.
Yeah. I have a clip that I would like to get your take on. So, yeah, we have time. All right. This is Al-Shara, Al-Jalani, whatever he wants to go by at this point. Listen to what he says here. And I want to get your take on this because this has been a pretty big contention on my channel among various guests. And he gives, I'm going to have Dan Kovalik on Friday. Dan Kovalik wrote the book, Dan and Kuzmarov, German Kuzmarov, wrote the book on Syria, basically how it collapsed, how it declined and everything else. It just came out. And so they're going to give this kind of rundown on it. But this has been a permanent argument on this channel among various people on how it collapsed and how it fell apart and the Russia's role involved. And for that matter, Iran's role.
Yeah.
This is Jalani. Listen to what he says here, because he's bringing in a key point.
وصلنا إلى حماة في المعركة التحرير فجرت مفاوضات بيننا وبين روسيا مع الروس نعم. فعند وصولنا إلى حمص الروس في هذا الوقت ابتعدوا عن المعركة، يعني انسحبوا تماما من المشهد العسكري اللي كان بقصف الطائرات أو ما إلى ذلك، يعني ضمن اتفاق جرى بيننا وبينهم. فهذا أثر بشكل إيجابي على المعركة. فنحن بذاك الوقت الروس أعطوا التزامات معينة لسوريا الحالية، ونحن أيضا أعطينا التزامات فنحن وفينا بها ووفوا بهم إلى هذه اللحظة. فلم يبدو منهم أي تدخل سلبي في الشأن السوري، بالعكس كان هناك يعني تفاعل إيجابي خلال الفترات الماضية. بالنسبة لإيران لا، الجرح كان أعمق بعض الشيء.
All right, I'm not going to play all of it, but I think the point is clear.
Yeah,
he's effectively saying, because people have been confused about how is Russia still there? How does Russia still have that military base there, especially with the U.S. Influence, Turkey's influence in the region, and yet they seem to be making some kind of agreement with his government in order to maintain a military base there and even deal with them almost as trading partners of sorts. He points out that during the war, I guess we can call it a war, that at a certain point, Russia made a deal with his forces to stop and pull back and to not attack. And in doing so, to effectively, we'll make an agreement not to attack. You make an agreement with us, I guess, for after all of this is over with, in which case both sides kept their agreements.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? I mean, this kind of...
Totally plausible what he's saying there, even though he's not a trustworthy person. But I think it's quite plausible that they did that. But what's most important to me is the timing. You see, he says when they reached Hama, they started talking to them. Now, the deal was cut with the Syrian army commanders, or the corruption of the Syrian army command was a done deal by then. And I'm pretty sure that Russia was close enough to the Syrian army command to know that it was over there. The Russian calculation was essentially similar to the Iranians from a different position. Iran had actually saw it coming and offered Assad some military support, and Assad distanced himself from it. He was trying to distance himself from Iran at that time. But Russia was with their base there, naval and air base. They saw what was happening, and my reading is that they did the best of a bad situation. They saw that if the Syrian army wasn't going to fight, they couldn't save them, basically. I know there's a lot of bad feeling in Syria at the moment about the Russians because they feel they could have done more. But basically, the Russians were never prepared to take the place of the Syrian Arab Army. It was a Syrian Arab Army with Russian air support mostly that did most of the liberation of cities, after 2015. But remember, the Soviet Union was in Afghanistan for a period of time, and effectively it supplanted the role of the former Afghan regime at that time, basically. And then it was a losing war for them, basically, because it was seen to be an occupation force, basically. Putin was aware of that, and Russia didn't go into Syria with the idea that he was going to replace the Syrian army. So if the majority of the army command had been purchased by Qatar and Turkey, obviously, the Qatar were the money bags, and Turkey was channeling it, through their people along that border and their relations with HTS. I believe that Russia simply had to quickly move to make the best of that situation, hang on to their base. They evacuated Assad. They evacuated the loyal army commanders to Russia, but they avoided the Syrian army having some infighting, some civil war, because the majority of the command had told the troops to pull back, and the Russians couldn't countermand that, basically. So they weren't part of. If the timing were that he had talks with them the week before, it would have been different. But because he says when they reached Hama, it was clear by then that something was going on in the Syrian army that they weren't going to put up. There was only a bit of sporadic resistance, basically, from Aleppo to Hama. So my reading is that they got drawn into that deal after the deal was done, in terms of the corruption of the Syrian army command. I know there's other people with conspiracy theories about Russia, going to some alliance with Syria. I don't believe that. It's true that, with the Israelis. It's true that Russia always had a different relationship with the Israelis. They weren't prepared to have any fight with the Israelis, but they were prepared, and the Hezbollah and Syria recognized this. They went in to help them with those terrorist groups. There was no ideological fight with the US over that, because the US was theoretically fighting the Al Qaeda groups and ISIS while they were helping them, basically. But so Russia went in without an ideological challenge, but also with a very clear aim not to replace the role of the Syrian Arab Army to the end, until I think that the army itself, they would have kept fighting had the many of these traitors in the army not been purchased, basically. And most of those traitors, by the way, are still in Syria, either in Damascus or in some country area of Tartus, where they are still working with Gilani's regime, with intelligence about where things are, and also certain people that even some of the traitors were themselves individually linked to massacres of the terrorist groups there, Gilani's groups. I mean, anyone who was working with the Syrian army against HTS, against ISIS, has become a target. But some of those who were involved in those actions are now collaborators, so they have some relative safety so long as they're an asset to the Gilani regime. But the problem is, of course, the Gilani regime doesn't really control the country yet. There's certain areas that are excluded, and there's no real sense of a nation that he's able to build. This is what the one of the Palestinian resistance people told me, who was in Damascus. Says these people, they can't build a homeland. They can't make people feel part of a homeland there. And of course, the Kurds are still up in the air over there. Their Turkish ally has fallen apart. The Druze are very worried, and some of them want protection from the Israelis, so that the country's a real mess, and Gilani's not able to establish a stable regime there, which is what the US wants, basically. You look at Ali Ahmadi's article, that's what he's saying there. That's the sort of thing they want, a Libya-style solution. Even Iraq was superior in a way, because Iraq has been trying to gradually regain some sort of sovereignty since 2003. Every now and then, the US will try and demonize or push out, like they pushed out al-Maliki, because he was trying to be a little bit independent. But the US has got its claws into the Iraqi economy. They control the finances. They're still They provide all this expensive military equipment, which they control too, because US military equipment is really never given freely to others, as we saw in Qatar. Basically, probably they got the back door to the Qatari air defense and just switched it off, basically. But Iraq is recovering, although they got federalized, which weakened them. They're recovering some sort of political will, but they're still trying to kick out the US occupation, which doesn't let them do all sorts of things.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Syria thing. When I talk to people who are, let's say, very boisterous about the idea that Russia just abandoned Syria, I like to point out that obviously Russia wanted to maintain that relationship. There was no win for them to lose the relationship with the previous government, considering what they've invested in that government. It sounds like, I agree with you, that when things got to the point of their military is melting away, what do we do?
I mean, there's resentment in Syria for some real reasons. There was always resentment that Russia hadn't provided the state-of-the-art air defense, even though they did provide air defense, and it was a deterrent to the Israelis. They shot down one plane and they stopped the Israelis flying over Syrian airspace. Now with Jilani, they're flying over Syrian airspace to attack Iran, and they'll use it to attack Iraq as well, and they use it to attack Qatar. So there was resentment over that. And then also because the big massacres back in March on the coast near Jableh were very close to the Russian base, and the Russians didn't intervene, or rather there was a small intervention. They gave out some weapons to people, said they were coming back, and they didn't. They didn't help people, the communities there on the coast, defend themselves. But then they took in refugees into the airbase, and I believe a number of them are still there. So there was a lot of ambiguous responses there, but it was a lot of ad hocery going on. I believe it's best understood as the Russians just trying to make the best of a very bad situation. Maybe some people on the base wanted to help the local people around Jableh, and maybe they were countermanded. I don't know exactly what's going on there. And the people in Russia are not talking, of course, because I think that's probably Putin's deal in terms of political asylum, as it was with the former president of Ukraine. What's his name? Back from 2004.
Yanukovych. Yeah.
Like Assad is in the same situation, I believe. He can live in Russia and he'll have to learn Russian, but they're not going to let him use Russia as a political platform. I think they've done that to all of the generals, all of the senior Syrian army officers who were there too, because they're not communicating very well. Only with some family members are they communicating.
Basically, you can come here, but you can't use us as a political. This is not a government in exile.
I think they tried to do it with Snowden, but Snowden in the end started to say some things. But they didn't want Snowden to be talking about U.S. intelligence on a Russian platform too. They won't extradite Assad to Jilani, of course, but at the same time they don't want him to be using Moscow as a platform for raising a new resistance front. There are, by the way, people who are talking about resistance fronts in Syria, but they're quite weak and divided at the moment. It's nothing substantial. And if you ask people in there, what is this group, the Islamic Resistance or whatever it is, are doing, they say that we haven't heard of them. So the Druze are the best organized and armed, but they're small and isolated, and many of them are inclined to look for Israeli support because the Druze in occupied Palestine have some sort of relationship with the Israelis. But the others, they're quite divided. The Alawis are very divided. They're intimidated by the reprisals against civilians, the civilian massacres there in March, where thousands were killed. So there isn't leadership at the moment. There isn't organization of resistance. But that's not to say resistance doesn't exist, or there aren't patriotic Syrians who would like to see a secular pluralist state back again. I'm sure that they would prefer to have a pluralist state rather than than Jilani's regime, because there isn't a minority they haven't attacked. They attacked the Ismailis recently, the Aga Khan Foundation. So they've attacked the Shia. They've suicide bombed a Christian church. They attacked Sleboda. They massacred the Alawis. There's really and a number of the Sunni people individually feel threatened now because people have their pictures taken with people in the government or the army before, and that they are chasing up and doing witch hunts of people for that too.
Wow, Jesus, I cannot wrap my head around.
I tried to get some people to talk from Syria, and there's a great sense of intimidation. They really don't want to speak out at the moment. It's very, very difficult for them. They think it's very, very dangerous for them to speak, just to talk about what's going on.
It is. I mean, it really is. I mean, these guys are animals. I mean, like, I cannot imagine being in a situation where you have somewhat of a secular government. You're on the beach in bikinis, and then a week later, you can get killed for doing anything like it. Meaning your reality just changes overnight, on a dime. I cannot.
I like the journalist, and she wanted to get her passport renewed, and they said, "Come in, we want to do an investigation." I said, "Get out, because you could just go into the office and they say you were doing propaganda for Assad. Bang, that's it. Or she's in jail or she's dead, basically." So a lot of people are still trying to leave the country in that way, but they're tied down because one, it's expensive, and two, they've got elderly parents and so on. So it's not that simple but a lot of people are looking to leave the country still.
I guess the last question is Erdogan. Where does he fit into this? I mean, for all intents and purposes, he was trying to build some kind of air defense in Syria. Israel bombed it. You have the situation now where, because of, I guess, the Balkanization of Syria, that Israel is rubbing up against Turkish borders in a way that they weren't prior. That can't be a good outcome for Erdogan. As you point out, he's a NATO country, but I don't get the sense that NATO is going to come to his assistance if Israel bombs Turkey. Yeah. Give me your take on that, and this could be the last question.
Well, the Israelis are definitely competing for influence. I mean, they're not on the border, but they're certainly undermining Turkey's attempt to establish some sort of regime based around Jolani. Erdogan put a lot of investment into, of course, he was helped by the Qataris, who are the money bags in the Muslim Brotherhood network there, but he invested a lot in a lot of these groups, including the foreign groups, including the Uyghurs from China, who are still in South Turkey, and also now down on the coast, trying to steal land, particularly from the Alawis and so on. And being given a mission, by the way, Jolani has a mission for a lot of the foreign fighters there to actually go and fight Hezbollah in Lebanon. But this assumes that maybe there's going to be an Israeli invasion. They're going to play some support role to the Israelis invading from the east side into the Bekaa Valley, which hasn't been done before. But Erdogan doesn't have that same obsession with Hezbollah, but he would like to extend his influence. But now he finds himself competing with the Israelis, and he's not ready to attack the Israelis. He's not ready to take them on in that sort of way. As you say, he's not going to feel confident that he's got the backing of the European NATO members in the way that the Israelis do.
To be honest with you, part of me slightly wants Israel to go rogue and hit Turkey just so they know where they are.
They're talking
Meaning
about
when NATO doesn't come to their rescue. And
some of them are talking about it.
Yeah.
They're talking about that because they say that once we get rid of Iran, there goes the Shia component of the so-called axis of resistance. And then we've got the Muslim Brotherhood influence to deal with, because Qatar was Muslim Brotherhood and Erdogan's Muslim Brotherhood. So they know, they're aware that they're clever. They know that that's another network, an important network. Hamas used to be part of it. It's not anymore, really. It's much more allied with Iran than with Qatar and Turkey these days. But so they're talking in those sorts of terms. But that's just this arrogance that comes from impunity. We'll do anything. One of the ministers, what's his name, Smotrich, is saying, we want Damascus. Damascus belongs to us, So they're saying all sorts of things now because they're emboldened by Washington. Washington just keeps giving them everything, basically. Biden wouldn't pull them up at all, and Trump just uses cruder language, which emboldens them further.
Yeah. Tim, you are fantastic. This was an awesome breakdown. Thank you for this. Honestly, I always appreciate your analysis, and you are sincerely good at it. Thank you. Tim Anderson. He is writer, internationalist, academic, director of Center for Hegemonic Studies. You can find him, Center for Counter Hegemonic Studies. And you can find his website, counterhegemonicstudies.site. Tim, thank you for this. By the way, is there anywhere else that people can find you, just in case I'm missing something?
Well, on Twitter, X, I suppose.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. And you're under Tim Anderson on Twitter. So
yeah.
You have a fantastic rest of your night. Thank you for this.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye. All right. That was a great breakdown by Tim. Great breakdown. Look, like I told you, most people don't believe that Qatar is going to do anything. That you have all of these military personnel that's on those bases in all of these Gulf states, and that for all intents and purposes, the U.S. effectively has them by the balls. It's like scream for me. By the same token, while that may be true, the U.S. broke the deal. Trump broke the agreement. They were, I think part of the reason that they're so shocked is because in their minds, they were going to be protected. They were special. They were safe. And if anything, this makes it very clear. A, you're not safe. B, the U.S. doesn't really care about your sovereignty. I mean, the U.S. they gave these, we don't like the fact that Israel did this. And of course, you get the articles that come out. Donald Trump is very angry that Israel attacked Qatar. But in a game of kings and thrones, I would imagine Qatar is smart enough to know that the U.S. greenlit that attack. This is not Israel going rogue. This was Israel given permission to make that strike. So when they know that, Saudi Arabia knows that, UAE knows that, Turkey can see Israel threatening them, also basically saying, you're next after we finish with Iran. And they're openly bragging about greater Israel, knowing full well that that takes parts of all of these countries, Egypt included. What do you do? Does that make you change your framing and your point of view of the world? Does that make you conspire to figure out how do we get from under this thumb? That's the interesting part to me. That is the interesting part to me. This could be a changing point. Maybe not. I mean, oftentimes they say the most cynical point of view is the one that often in our world pops up or bubbles up as right. By the same token, there is a rational take that rational human beings, and realizing that they are not special, they are no longer safe, they're not in a glass vase, that when it comes down to Israel, that for the most part, they can be hit. And if you look at, okay, where are your other enemies that the U.S. is protecting you from? Who? Iran? Iran is not trying to attack you. You've made diplomatic agreements or a relationship with Iran. Hell, they were at the meeting trying to push for a more boisterous point of view. Egypt was at the meeting trying to push for a more boisterous point of view, saying we need a NATO-style arrangement with all of these other republics. If one of us gets hit, all of us gets involved. This seems a bit rich to me, considering that Syria is being hit constantly and has been invaded, and Lebanon gets hit constantly and has been invaded. But it's an interesting thing to be put out. And the meeting in and of itself does get across something that A, Israel is a pariah, and B, our recognition, our engagement with it. Yeah, part of it was economic, but part of it also was that the U.S. was putting pressure for them to engage in that way. Will they accept this notion of subjugation by a maniac state that can effectively attack them at any moment? And will they accept the U.S. effectively putting their thumb on the scale to try to get them to accept that? I don't know. I don't know. It's fascinating. It really is. History does have corners. It's not necessarily always a straight line. And you can make strategic mistakes. Trump going after India when really you just needed to meet with Modi, put your arm around him, give him a Coke, and sing We Are the World or something. And Modi would have been your inroads into BRICS. Instead, you decide you want to have hubris and be a hegemon and push him closer to China and Russia, so much so you come out with a tweet saying we've lost India and Russia to China. Things can be handled better, is my point. Maybe Donald Trump is sending a message with that attack. I don't know. I guess we will see. I will have future analysis on this by other guests, just because this doesn't seem to be something that's going anywhere anytime soon. This seems to have reverberations that are more significant than just Israel attacks another country and the other country lays down. They may lay down, but right now they seem to be trying to marshal other forces in the region to effectively back them up in the system, making the argument, you also are fair game. You will be and can be next. We will see today whether the argument is sufficient enough to have any kind of countermeasures against Israeli behavior. We'll see. I do think it's a bit rich that they're arguing international law, considering all of these Gulf states have put all of this money into overthrowing the Syrian government. And the overthrow of that government is the direct reason that Israel has been able to occupy Syria as we speak, or parts of Syria. So there is that. There is that. Mark will be on in a few minutes. I would like to show this letter that Donald Trump. Oh, by the way, Syria, before we close this up. I've had guests come on the show that will strongly make the argument that Russia betrayed Syria. I never accepted that argument. I never accepted that argument because it's not in their interest to betray Syria. For all intents and purposes, Russia would have preferred Bashar al-Assad still being in power as we speak. Iran would have preferred Bashar al-Assad still being in power as we speak, especially considering that gives them an inroad to attack Iran. Not to mention you have this weak government that can't even defend itself. that has replaced Syria. Yes, Russia has kept its base. No, it is not the most ideal thing in the world when you're under the whim of Istanbul. And let's be honest, Erdogan is a snake. Do I believe, however, that out of practicality, when it got to the point where it seemed like these guys aren't fighting, many of these people have been paid off, the military is buckling, and we are not here to replace the Syrian army, that they would have made a deal? Yes. That makes sense to me. That may be hated, that may be disliked, but these are realist governments. And if it looks as if a government is collapsing and can't be salvaged, a decision is going to have to be made at some point on what do we do? What do we do? We can't salvage this government. We can't fight this war on their behalf. Many of these people have been paid off. Other people have been given orders to effectively lay down their weapons and leave. What do we do? And it seems like what they did was they made a deal. And what we're seeing now is the outcome of that deal, where they're able to keep those military bases with some kind of agreements made with head chopper in chief in Syria. People may hate that, but what would you do in that situation? If you were Russia, what would you do? What would you do? What would you do? Donald Trump sent a letter to NATO. I'm going to read this letter because the letter is pretty astonishing. I firmly place this in the category of a bluff. Of a bluff. I am sick of you asking daddy, me, for ice cream. Stop asking me for ice cream. Stop asking me for ding dongs and ho-hos. I know you want a pony. I'm tired of you asking me for a pony. If you want a pony, then I need you to do X and Y, Z. This is the message that Trump sent, or the letter that Donald Trump sent to Europe. And I'm going to read this out. A letter sent by President Donald Trump to all NATO nations, and by the way, not just Europe, NATO nations, meaning Istanbul, Turkey included, to all NATO nations and the world. I am ready to do major sanctions on Russia when all NATO nations have agreed and started to do the same thing. And when NATO nations stop buying oil from Russia, as you know, NATO's commitment to win has been far less than 100%, and the purchase of Russian oil by some has been shocking. It's been shocking. It shocked me. Shocked the conscience. It's greatly weakening your negotiating position and bargaining power over Russia. Anyway, I'm ready to, quote, go, unquote, when you are. Just say when. I believe that this plus NATO as a group placing 50 to 100% tariffs on China will be fully withdrawn after the war with Russia and Ukraine is ended. Will also be great help in ending this deadly but ridiculous war. China has a strong control, even a grip over Russia, and these powerful tariffs will break that grip. This is not Trump's war. It would never have started if I was president. It is Biden and Zelensky's war. I am only here to stop it and save thousands of Russian and Ukrainian lives. 7,118 lives lost last week alone. Crazy! If NATO does as I say, the war will end quickly and all of those lives will be saved. If not, you are just wasting my time, my energy, and money of the United States. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. He has effectively told NATO, look, I'm sick of you begging me to get further involved. I'm tired of it. I will get involved. I'm ready to go when you are ready to go. And by go, stop using Russian oil and gas products. And on top of stop using Russian oil and gas, I would imagine this is also from Saudi Arabia. This is also from India, anywhere where oil is being piped around. And if you do that, then I'm ready to go and get involved. And then to make the point of saying, this is Zelensky's war. This is Joe Biden's war. I had nothing to do with this. It's just amazing. I want to bring in my guest, my man, Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst. You can find Mark on Boosty at Real Politic with Mark Sleboda, or just put in his name, Mark Sleboda, and he will appear. Mark, how you doing today, man? You doing okay?
I'm alive, Jamal. Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Well, Mark, it's always an honor and a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining me. I was reading Trump's quote unquote ultimatum to the audience. I do want to get your take on that. In fact, let me play this video first. This is Donald Trump reiterating what was in that letter. I'm pretty sure you read it. I just read it to the audience, so I don't need to necessarily rehash. But effectively, look, I will go after Russia with sanctions if you are willing to stop using all Russian oil and gas, even I would imagine from third parties like India, Saudi Arabia, wherever else. And if you put 100% sanctions on China, then I will be willing to get involved and I will be willing to do this. Otherwise, you're wasting my time. You're wasting the money of America. You're wasting my energy. Leave daddy alone. So this is Trump being asked about this on the tarmac somewhere.
Has to get together. Europe has to get together and do it. Look, Europe they're my friends, but they're buying oil from Russia. So we can't be expected to be the only ones that are, full bore. But Europe is buying oil from Russia. I don't want them to buy oil. And the sanctions that they're putting on are not tough enough. And I'm willing to do sanctions, but they're going to have to toughen up their sanctions commensurate with what I'm doing. Just to clarify, you want to move ahead. Has to get together.
So,
Europe has
Mark, give me your take on that. I mean, it comes across as if Daddy is tired of Europe asking for a pony. Give me your take. Give me your take first.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that Trump is maneuvering himself out of a hole that he dug himself into several months ago when he made threats of launching 100% tariffs, sanctions, effectively, in the form of 100% tariffs on goods from China and India, because China and India refused to stop buying Russian energy, in particular oil. And since then, he has come under an enormous amount of pressure to follow through on his threats, because Russia obviously has not ended the special military operation on on American terms, right? Which is what the intention of those bluffs, those threats was. But somewhere along the line, someone with some, I guess, a fraction of actual economic knowledge within his administration pointed out to him that if he did that, it would crash the global economy. Americans would be paying through the roof for gasoline. Inflation would go sky high. Everyone in the world would be facing that, but Americans would not be immune to it. And already looking ahead to midterm elections and the like, I guess Trump decided that maybe that wasn't such a good idea after all. But he has come under enormous pressure, both from within the U.S. and I would venture even within his own administration, from bipartisan Congress, from the deep state, from everyone really, to follow through. And he has come, that is accompanied by enormous pressure from the U.S.'s European vassals. The tail wagging the dog on this particular issue. Right. And he seems to have struck on a largely, rhetorical, semantic, but logic to avoid following through on this, on his previous threats. And that is that, well, if we're going to do it, the Europeans should do it as well. Of course, they can't do it because their economy's already falling apart, already desperate. They can't survive being cut off of what is effectively laundered Russian oil through India and Turkey. Because they're already paying a significant markup over what they were. And those higher energy costs are deindustrializing Germany and sending costs and deficits soaring throughout much of the EU. And the Europeans still run, unlike the United States, export economies for the most part, right? Particularly Germany and others, where and the biggest source of, or the biggest destination of many of their exports is to China, right?
Mhm.
And they know very well that if they put, as China has promised, that if they install 100% tariffs on China, China will do right back to them what it did to the U.S. and say tit tat, tit tat, tit tat, and that's it. And the Chinese, the European economies would collapse completely. I think I've described it before. It's not so much it would be a nail in the coffin. It would be kicking that the coffin's already in the ground, sealed up, and it would just be kicking the dirt in on the coffin, from above. So they can't. They obviously they can't do this. There are some people who have suggested that they're that fanatical. And I do believe that Merz and Starmer and Macron, who seem to have no regard for their own country citizens, for their own domestic economic and political situation, and are utterly obsessed with the conflict with Russia, in the proxy conflict with Russia and Ukraine. They might very well try to scheme of a way where they can follow through on this, but I don't think they're going to. We just heard 2 weeks ago from French and British ministers that they might have to consider bailout loans from the IMF because they're facing financial collapse, and that it would be before this. So Trump seemed to have struck on what is a largely rhetorical but logical device to disarm both the Europeans and the forces, the dogs of war against Russia in the United States, principally Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal in the Senate, but not only. Of course, those are just the most obvious ones, and they've already attempted a workaround of this. They tried to sneak their version of bone-crushing tariff sanctions against China and India into a government spending package, but evidently the House Speaker is not having any of it thus far, so it doesn't seem like that ploy will work. But it's not the end of the story. There will be further maneuvering, but in the eyes of the public, shall we say, right? Both the U.S. and the European publics, but primarily the American. Trump seems to have a fairly strong, logical, rhetorical argument about why he can't. If the Europeans won't do it, why should we? And that plays to his, supposed Israel first. No, I'm sorry, America first agenda in this case. It serves as an ability to deflect. And again, he's deflecting a trap that he himself walked into by making this threat, this bluff against Russia months ago. But Russia didn't move, China didn't move, India didn't move, Turkey and Hungary and Slovakia didn't even think about moving. That has led us, to this situation. And the Europeans are just outraged. To be fair, that letter that Donald Trump sent, at least, I don't know what it looks like on paper, but the way it looks like on social media was the usual Trump style and screaming capital letters and bluntness. Yep. Don't waste my time. That is a biatch slap in the face to the Europeans. There's no way, to regard it any other way. And it certainly, probably caused the despondent Zelensky to, dip into whatever morale supplies he still has in the Mason cabinet, because it's a pretty strong political position, I think, for Trump. Again, that he is digging himself out of right now. But it's not the end of the story. And it has to be said, the Europeans are also equally outraged about the lack of Trump's response to the latest Ukrainian false flag with duct-taped drones being dropped in Poland.
Yep. I was going to get to that too, because that's
Trump
pretty. He just shrugged. He was
just shrugged. It could have been a mistake, and that was it. And that's it. I mean, it's hard to argue. I mean, okay, so let's say that they were actual Russian drones flown by Russia intentionally in the Polish airspace. They were all fiberglass decoys without any explosives, which the Polish government has freely admitted. And the Polish government was told they were coming by Belarus, which was almost certainly acting on behalf of Russia, warning that it detected that they were about to enter Polish territory. And they still absolutely struggled with all of NATO's jets and air defense to bring down 4 slow-moving, unarmed fiberglass and plywood drones, which has led since then to a sudden cold bath. The Western media has suddenly realized that they are completely vulnerable to Russian drones, something they should have realized. Or any drones for that matter. Yeah, you're right. I mean, non-state actors could use drones, right? The same game that the Kiev regime pulled by in Operation Spiderweb with a cargo truck full of drones, right? That could be launched anywhere in the United States, which receives more cargo containers, and it doesn't even have to be by a state actor, right? It could be by terrorists, right? Genuine terrorists, not make believe I'm going to call everyone I don't like terrorists like the U.S. usually does. That it could be done by just about anyone. We're seeing the proliferation of not a weapon of mass destruction, but of a conventional military technology that can have dramatic results, in any country in the world, including the United States. And let's face it, that there are very few countries in the world that have adequate air defense, right now, against such kinds of threats. Russia has demonstrated that it largely does, and it probably has the best air defense and electronic warfare in the world. Israel was found wanting in the last few months, despite help from the US and the UK and France and Saudi Arabia and everyone else. Other countries, European countries, the US homeland, are incredibly more vulnerable. So the fact that the U.S. refused to, that Trump refused to react to this quite obvious, deliberate provocation to draw NATO and the U.S., further in or further back into the Ukraine conflict was, just ignored by him. And I mean, the Europeans and the neocons in the U.S., and when I say neocons, it's a general bipartisan term, because bipartisan consensus. In fact, these are two such refutations of attempts to escalate against Russia that I have to worry about Trump, right? Because these are significant.
Yeah. So does this give you a rethink that Trump may not want to get sucked in further into this conflict?
I've never said that Trump wanted to get in further. I said it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, because the deep state, the institutions of the U.S. government, are what ultimately decide things. And like I said, this game is not over. Right. Wait until some Jeffrey Epstein videos of Trump doing something appear, and then suddenly you'll see Trump very interested. I'm providing a potential example. What I'm saying is that the deep state, right, the permanent bureaucracy, the blob, does not play fair when their geopolitical foreign policy orthodoxy of hegemony is not followed through by the figureheads that be. Trump appears at the moment to be in a strong political position. Now, I don't ultimately believe that this is due for any love for Russia or any rejection of U.S. hegemony or its machinations. It's simply that Trump walked himself into a dangerous economic trap, and he does, I believe, think about the economy, at least in the terms that he is capable of thinking about it, which I'm not always sure are very good terms. But he did not want to oppose. He just lost quietly while claiming victory, lost a trade war with China. He can't walk back into another one. Right, it'd be cut off. Have the U.S. companies cut off from rare earths, from magnets. U.S. military cut off from it. Right, high tech magnets needed for all kinds of modern high end electronics and military gear. The big tech was sounding the alarm in the United States. Right, that they were going to be in serious problems. So he can't. He's again, reaching for arrows in the quiver, and the quiver is empty. So that is a legacy that was handed down to him by the Biden administration, and he has been dancing and maneuvering ever since then. He still, of course, wants to end the conflict in Ukraine on American terms, but he has no leverage to do so, right? And he's been maneuvering ever since. And again, he keeps walking himself into this trap where he makes threats against Russia that he can't back up. I mean, Putin agreeing to go to Alaska and meet him, where Putin had earlier been putting off the idea of meeting Trump directly before there's any kind of settlement of the Ukraine issue, or at least of bilateral relations, nothing significant, in the détente area accomplished. Putin refused, and suddenly he agreed. Why? To help Trump get out of the rhetorical trap that he had walked into by making threats, on China and India, to go after Russia that he couldn't back up. So that allowed him some time. And he has used that time well, because now they've come up with this threat against, that Europe has to do it first. Then we'll be glad to do it, and knowing full well that they can't do it. But it's something that they have obviously stumbled upon latter day. They could have made this argument earlier. They didn't. They've stumbled upon it now. I'm glad they have, in the sense of not wanting to see escalation of the conflict in Ukraine, but pretty sure it's going to happen at some point. It's just, I think Trump has stumbled upon another reprieve in this situation. But again, I don't think this is the end of the story. It's just the end of a chapter.
Yeah, he found a way to extricate himself out of a fix.
Temporarily.
Temporarily. If you do agree that Putin found a way to assist Trump in pulling himself out of a fix in Alaska?
Yes.
Donald Trump found a way to.
Because nothing else was accomplished there. So.
Okay. Yes. Okay. What is Russia waiting on? I mean, I'm seeing every day. I'm seeing attacks that go back and forth. I'm seeing Russia making moves on the battlefield. So they clearly have a coherent strategy of this kind of attrition, with this idea that this is eating away at the Ukrainian military. You can see it eating away at the Ukrainian military. By the same token, every so often, Ukraine does hit an oil refinery or something to that effect.
It's a war, absolutely. And they still have NATO backing. There are still U.S. generals in Reisbaden directing Ukrainian strikes with U.S. satellite intelligence, right?
I guess what I'm getting at is the strategy, the thought being, if I keep going, at some point, the U.S., the Ukraine is going to come to their senses. Meaning, is that the point? of a war of attrition strategy. Oh,
no,
so you
no, I think the strategy is that eventually the Kiev regime's military will collapse and NATO won't have anything left to prop them up. And then it will be this, that is the battlefield decision. I don't think Russia is waiting on anything. I think they're following through with their plan. I understand the plan is not fast or dramatic enough for some people, but the Russian military doesn't do Hollywood-style military operations, right? They're doing what they are sure will lead them to victory at the end of this, and that they're very much focused on. And this, again, is not just about Ukraine, and it's not just about Russian security in Europe via NATO. Ultimately, and the U.S. recognizes this is almost certainly a world order shaping conflict.
Right.
Because the West has put so much on the line, right? They have literally said, NATO, that Russia has to lose, that their proxy has to win. And that is, they've invested so much geopolitical capital that, the whole specter of U.S.-led Western global hegemony apart is fear, right? And if that fear of the threat of what the U.S. can do. And if Russia, something that the U.S. had derided as, a gas station masquerading as a country, or, Nigeria with snow, or whatever, had defeated them, then that is literally the end of hegemony. Largely because they've put so much, they themselves put so much on the line in Ukraine. It didn't necessarily have to be that way. And in that sense, the conflict is as existential for them, and they're on the losing side of it.
Agreed. Is the fear of hitting decision-making centers, like going after the SBU, going after some of the command control, that this will potentially inspire NATO to get further involved? And Russia believes that if they just keep with the same strategy, it's consistent, it may be slow, but it's consistent, we know it works, etc., that a slow collapse is better than a dramatic breakdown.
Well, first of all, I would say that Russia has gone after the SBU, right? They have, in the past, in this conflict, several times, at least two, I think 3 times, struck facilities that were supposedly the SBU with even hypersonics in Kiev. So I'm not so sure, at least when it comes to the Kiev regime's intelligence services, that this is a lack of political will so much as a lack of capability, that they're simply hidden and dug in deep enough that Russia feels that they may not be able to. And we found out from Lukashenko, right? Which was obviously intentionally leaked to us through him, that supposedly he had a conversation with Putin where Putin told him that the general said, we have Oreshniks ready to hit decision-making centers in Kiev, and Putin said no because of the resulting collateral damage of civilians that would inevitably result from that. So that is at least as much of a restraint. They're dug in so deep that it would require very big weapons to penetrate deep enough, underground or wherever rat holes that they're hidden in to get them out. So
he doesn't want to take the civilian casualties.
They're confident that they can take whatever, it's Russia has them in a death grip, right? They has them by the nose, like a mastiff mauling something, right? And they're hitting back and they're punching with their last breaths, they're punching, poking eyes, whatever. And that mastiff is not letting go. It doesn't mean that they won't do some amount of damage while going down. But quite obviously, the Russian military and government's assessment is that what damage the Kiev regime and its NATO proxies are doing is something that they can endure.
I see. Let's go to the battlefield for a bit. So I was looking at the map. TASS is reporting that Kupyansk that many of the Ukrainians have left, well, let's say the military has left Kupyansk, even though there's still groups that are effectively there for all intents and purposes. It is on its last leg. This is the map. I think Brian Berletti put this one up, if I'm not mistaken. Shout out to Brian. This is one of the maps. And I guess in this map, we can see that Russia has entered Kupyansk. And let's see, what is the second map? I'm not sure what the second map is, but both maps are related to the same region. Also, Siversk is another one of those areas where the Russians seem to have been able to enter. And I'm even seeing another, what do they call it? Oil tunnel attack that took place. That just seems out of a movie or something.
Yeah. So first of all, it has to be said, those are Ukrainian maps. I know Brian insists on using them as some kind of cautionary level. I don't agree, actually. I mean, I love Brian to death, but I don't agree with using Ukrainian maps.
No, that's fair. But he's trying to make the point of saying, even on their maps.
Even on their maps. I understand that. I just think I don't believe in that narrative argument, right? I don't believe in bowing to their narrative ever. But that being said, yes, quite obviously, right? So we've gotten word that Russian forces are fighting, right? So Russian forces are currently fighting in 4 major Kiev regime-held settlements in the Donbass and southern Kharkov, right? Kupyansk, Siversk, Konstantinovka, and Pokrovsk. In all 4 of those cities, there is fighting within the city limits, quite often, within the center of the cities. And Kupyansk is one of these examples. And Kupyansk is almost certainly going to fall at this point before Pokrovsk. They're all going to fall, right? Or be liberated in Russian terminology. It's just a matter of time. Now, we have pretty much definitive evidence that at least part of the operations, the success in Kupyansk, is due to yet another pipeline operation, where Russian troops used an existing Soviet-built pipeline to send troops 4 kilometers right behind the front lines. It was I saw the videos of Russian troops emerging from, presumably taken by a Russian drone, of Russian troops emerging from the end of the pipeline, right? So that the video is out there of that. There's also videos of them traveling in the pipeline. They actually have like little cargo sleds to facilitate moving their equipment through the pipelines. There's a whole methodology to this. There's video that the Kiev regime had attempted to block the pipes at some point, right? Recognizing the threat, with just basic concertina wire rolled up and shoved into the pipes that, the Russians just, I'm sure it was like, God damn it, and then they had to remove it, but remove it they did, quite obviously. And it's just this is the 4th major pipeline incursion by my counting, right? We saw one in the Kursk region, one in Avdiivka, and there was a couple of others along the way. And again and again, the Kiev regime is not taking adequate defenses against this. I don't know, if I was a Ukrainian commander before this, one of the very first things I would have done is fill those pipes with cement or whatever, right? Blow them up, get rid of them, so that is not but they I don't know how many more times it can possibly work after this one. But yes, it allowed Russia to transit troops deep into Kupyansk, right? And popping up behind the Kiev regime's defensive lines in force, right? With special forces. And I'm certain that, they have a whole, obviously a methodology for pipeline warfare at this point, right? It's pretty impressive. I'm sure the Donbass coal miners were or are at the forefront of doing this, because they are used to the psychological and physical traumas of traveling in very tight contained spaces for militaries. And supposedly, I mean, I saw that the length of them moving, it was a 4-day trip
Yes.
at the speed they're moving. 4 days, and they had places to sleep and to eat and presumably to remove waste, I guess. I can't even imagine it, really.
I can't imagine it either. I couldn't believe it. When I saw the fall, I was like, 4 days. They did this 4 days. How big are these pipes, by the way? Do we know?
I mean, it's not big enough to stand up in. That's why they have the carts, right? If they kneel, they can probably kneel and walk on their knees. Around 4 feet in diameter.
Wow.
Not 5 feet. I don't think so.
Pipeline warfare. Wow. It just, you said it's not like a movie. This is kind of like a movie. And just an operation like this, you go 4 days for 4 kilometers, you pop out the other end and engage in combat, surprising the enemy because you are now behind their enemy lines.
Yep.
And apparently they handled it poorly because at this point Russia has a hold into that Kupyansk. How long do you expect them to be able to hold out in these locations? Because it sounds like there's going to be one falling after the other.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say because, of course, they keep pushing whatever possible reinforcements, right, that they can possibly throw in. Particularly the fighting around the Pokrovsk area is extremely intense, right, as Russia attempts to completely physically close off the last supply lines in and out of Pokrovsk, right? There is I think that's probably the most intense fighting of the entire conflict going on right now in and around the Pokrovsk area. So without knowing exactly how much the Kiev regime, evidently they're not using reserves at this point. They're pulling troops from other locations, right? Kherson, Zaporozhye, Sumy region. But Russia also did a major regrouping in the last month, and the Kiev regime, Telegram channels warned about, that Russia was going to push home the Donbass offensive, that they had diverted forces also from Sumy and Zaporozhye and other areas to the Donbass in an attempt to finish that up, presumably to finish, again, I would assume that the attempt is to polish off these 4 settlements that I'm talking about, right? Pokrovsk, Konstantinovka, Siversk, and Kupyansk, and probably Izum as well, right? Before the end of the year, which would then lead next spring to putting the end of the last defensive line, which would be Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, right, and rolling up Donbass. Now, I will point out that I was too optimistic because I had been saying for months now that I believed that the last defensive line, that Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, would be done or all but done by the end of the year. And I was too optimistic. Everyone else was, shall we say, talking Kiev and Odessa and Dnipropetrovsk and everything else. And I was saying, well, by the end of the year, we'll probably be almost done in the Donbass. Well,
not so
the
much.
attrition war is, forever grinding on, and we're at least 6 months behind that. And I think I generally, at least in the alt media, provided what was considered the most pessimistic assumption, and that was too optimistic. It's a long, slow, bitter, bloody fight, and they're still able to get their licks in, and they're still fighting for the most part. And I know people want them to collapse yesterday. They want it to be over, and it, I guess, is mentally in a tough position to continue saying, right, without the obvious evidence flying in the propaganda coming from the Western mainstream media, that Russia is winning the war of attrition, and eventually this will lead to, an unquestioned Russian victory at the end. And a lot of people are, I guess, wanting things to happen faster and more dramatically. And I certainly understand that. I have felt that in my cold, dark heart of hearts as well, right? But I would say, hey, take a chill. The Russian military seems to know what they are doing.
Yeah.
And they have, it's not just Ukraine. It's not just the Kiev regime. The Kiev regime military was defeated back in 2022. This is a demilitarization and a defeat, not only of NATO, but really of the entire U.S.-led Western global hegemony. I mean, they've dragged artillery shells from South Korea and Pakistan and Israel and everywhere else they could possibly supply them. Even Serbia has been supplying Kiev regime forces, right, for much of this conflict. And Russia has handily, with very little support, right, support from North Korea and Iran, essentially, and minimal support, I would say, in that scale, has emerged or is emerging, because again, we should not put the cart before the horse, right? The final chapter isn't written yet, even if it's pretty clear where the narrative is going.
Mark, I want to show a video. Well, I guess there are two. One is coming from Kellogg, who, again, when I hear people being shrill, I start to think that they're concerned. Like there's something else going on where people are being shrill and they say insane stuff. So this is Kellogg. At least I thought it was Kellogg, if I could find the clip. There we are. This is Kellogg. I want you to listen to his commentary and give me your take on this statement. Because, again, there are two different things taking place. In one sense, Trump is trying to extricate himself out of a policy position that would have been devastating to the U.S. and, for that matter, to Europe. But then you get Kellogg saying stuff like this.
Rattles his nuclear trigger.
There we are. Come on. Okay, 1 second. Let me reload this. Hate it when that happens.
They talk a big game, but I don't think they're the. I think right now, the way the Europeans are standing up, I would be very, very worried if I was a Putin. Just a comment. He sometimes rattles his nuclear trigger chain by saying, "Well, we're a nuclear power." I'd remind him, the U.S. is too, but so's Britain, so's France. And I said, just throw it right back at him. And I think you're seeing that with the Europeans standing up right now. It's the Europeans' war because it's the Europeans' backyard and they see it. But it's one of those where we had a discussion recently in the Oval where, it goes back to what I said earlier about. I'm sorry to the ladies in here, right? But they were talking about the primacy of the Russian military and how they were, pretty good. And I said to the people in the room, we'd kick their ass. And I mean by that.
Mark, Kellogg apparently feeling a little male injured.
You just heard the U.S. blob, the deep state, in all of its incoherent, impotent, dementia-ridden.
Kick their ass.
Yeah, sure, okay, all right.
That feels like
and whatever army that your coalition of the willing is unable to put together to actually fight Russia in Ukraine for the umpteenth impotent and irrelevant meeting, circle jerk, that you had recently in Paris or whatever, right? I mean, he's just rambling. He's not even making any sense. I mean, he's just,
that's the blob.
I think that's the blob, right? I keep telling you, that is, those who are trying, of course, to push Trump back to escalation and back to the prior path, but it's not even making it's making about as much sense as Joe Biden does at the end of his presidency. He's not coherent, and he's not really addressing anything that's obviously happening in the conflict. Like, I don't know, we talk about every week. And
Yeah.
When things are going wrong, I try to think that I point out where, okay, well, Russia made a mistake here, or they're not moving, as fast as some people would like there, and so forth. But they're just, I don't know if he actually believes this, right? If he's that old and that dementia ridden that he's still locked in his own fantasy world, or if this is just part of the propaganda bubble. But there's another video of him in Kiev. And by the way, they're celebrating whenever Kiev arrives, whenever Kellogg arrives in Kiev, because the Russians evidently are not striking Kiev with air and drone strikes while he's there, which I have to admit infuriates me. I'm like, why? Because Kellogg is there? Get the hell out of here.
He's
right?
an air defense. Yeah,
I'm sure they're not, anyway. They're talking to him about the U.S.'s best air defense shield, presumably because he's Trump's,
pretty much. I guess
attack dog or whatever. But there's another video of him on this trip talking with Kirilo Budanov, the head of the Kiev regime's, military intelligence. The former I like the dark Budanov, although he's recently appeared in the daylight, just disproving my theory that he was a vampire. But they were
rings for that, by the way.
Yeah,
the magic rings.
They were talking in front of a physical, like statue, physical representation of the Kiev regime's military intelligence unit's symbol, which is of an eagle, like a eagle, holding a sword and plunging that sword into the world, right through Russia, of course, right? I mean, that's the symbolic intent, right? And they're standing right in front of that when they were doing the photo op. And it's quite obvious what that is, a signal that Kellogg is there, specifically talking to Budanov, the Kiev regime's military intelligence chief, because we can expect many more escalations from the dirty war, right? The battlefield's going south. So, the U.S. may not be able to put sanction tariffs on China and India, and may not be able to provide Patriot systems and whatever, but it doesn't mean that they're not doing anything or not going to do nothing. They're going to try to raise the costs for Russia as much as possible. And almost certainly that is a clear enough signal as day to me that we can expect in the coming days, weeks, months, further escalation of the dirty war behind the lines, right? The unconventional warfare, the asymmetric warfare, more Operation Spiderweb, or attacks on the Crimean Bridge, or oil refinery strike, whatever they can possibly do with asymmetric forces, because they can't win on the battlefield.
Just to be clear, though, the Russian perspective in this is that they are most likely going to have to take all of Ukraine, because Ukraine is not going to surrender.
That is not the official Russian position. That has been raised by people including Lavrov and Medvedev, right, multiple times. But the official Russian position is not that. The official Russian position is still,
negotiations.
Yeah, negotiate that the Kiev regime should recognize reality, right? And they keep making the threats that we'll take more if you don't come, but that's still not the official position. But my belief is that the Kiev regime and Europe in particular, whatever happens with the United States, whatever game they're playing to pretend, there's no question the Trump administration is distancing itself from this conflict in various ways, right? They've obviously decided for their own economic position, they can't follow through on this tariff war on China and India. And they're not providing weapons in the same quantity that Joe Biden did. On the other hand, it's not clear that they have weapons to provide, even if they wanted them to, right? So it's not necessarily any restraint or love of Russia on Trump's part. It's just that the quiver is empty. There's nothing left there. Biden already used it all. Anything they could possibly give the Kiev regime that it could effectively use, right? I mean, they could give them F-35s, but they couldn't use them effectively, right? So
not to fly them. Yeah.
That's, that's where the Russian position is. I just don't think that they're going to give up. And I think Russia will be forced to occupy all of Ukraine, at least to Kiev, but more than likely further, into the very much unwanted Western Ukraine. Simply because if they don't do it, NATO will.
Right.
And at the end of the day, however bad a guerrilla war in West Ukraine would be, and it would be bad, and it is not a good option, it would, at the end of the day, worse to have NATO parked there, directly, openly. So, again, it's not the bad option. When I talk about Russia being forced to occupy of all Ukraine, you should not think that that is a good thing for Russia or in Russian terms. It's because they don't have any other options. And it's going to be bad. It's just going to be less bad than the alternative, right? You can accept Russia's position, but as John Mearsheimer himself has repeatedly said, the best that Russia gets out of this is an ugly victory. And I think that sums it up. I know people don't want to hear that. People want a happy story, right? A long struggle and a happy ending, with victory at the end of it. And that's not the real world, unfortunately. We don't live in that world.
Yeah.
We live in a world.
I agree with you. Because I could never figure out how they stop. Like go back years ago, I think I used to ask, okay, well, how do they get out of this? How do they extricate themselves from it? And I guess the answer is they don't. Especially if there's not going to be a capitulation. Not
unless there is widespread regime change across the West that would bring rational, reasonable people that almost certainly don't exist to power in multiple capitals across Europe and the United States.
Yeah, I don't see that. Not anytime soon. Yeah. Last question, Mark. This video popped up. This is Al-Jilani, head chopper-in-chief in Syria. And he was asked about the war, basically when the Syrian government effectively faded away and collapsed. And we've had people on this channel who have feelings about Russia's role in that. And just so happened, somebody asked Al-Jilani the question of what is the relationship between the new iteration of Syria, quote unquote, and Russia? And was there, well, I'll just play it and I'll get your take on it.
Syria doesn't exist anymore. There's an Islamic State.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's why I said it like that. This is not Syria.
وصلنا إلى حماة في المعركة التحرير، فجرت مفاوضات بيننا وبين روسيا. مع الروس نعم. فعند وصولنا إلى حمص، الروس في هذا الوقت ابتعدوا عن المعركة. يعني انسحبوا تماما من المشهد العسكري اللي كان بقصف الطائرات أو ما إلى ذلك، يعني ضمن اتفاق جرى بيننا وبينهم. فهذا أثر بشكل إيجابي على المعركة. فنحن في ذاك الوقت الروس أعطوا التزامات معينة لسوريا الحالية، ونحن أيضا أعطينا التزامات، فنحن وفينا بها ووفوا بهم إلى هذه اللحظة. فلم يبدو منهم أي تدخل سلبي في الشأن السوري، بالعكس كان هناك يعني تفاعل إيجابي خلال الفترات الماضية.
So, just so the audience, just in case they couldn't see it and they don't speak Arab, he pointed out, come on. He pointed out, he says, look, we had a deal with the Russians. They stopped bombing us. They pulled back. And we made agreements in the context of that deal that the Russians have held up their parts of the bargain. We've held up ours. They haven't interfered in our domestic affairs. And we appreciate them for that. Iran, on the other hand, not so much. Basically, F Iran, but the Russians have effectively stuck with the deal. And I guess this gets to the whole thing of the Russian bases, how they remain in Syria. I guess is less precarious than I thought it was. Give me your take on that. I mean, when you hear that from him, what do you think?
I think that Erdogan has his hand up Al Qaeda's butt and is speaking right there. That's what I hear. I hear Erdogan, right?
Yeah.
And I hear this ISIS and Al Qaeda leader mouthing what Erdogan wants him, because Erdogan doesn't want, of course, war with Russia. Doesn't want any, he walks a very fine balance. Turkey depends on Russian energy and trade and lots of other things. It's a very complicated dance between Russia, geopolitical and economic dance between Russia and Turkey. It's one of the least satisfying, most real politic examples of Russian foreign policy. Now, what he's pointing out is that at Homs, the game was already over, right? Russia was fighting Al Qaeda, and I mean, this is a story of, again, how somewhere between 15 and 30,000, Al Qaeda irregulars overran what was on paper a 200,000 strong Syrian army that had been in control of the largest share of Syria and backed up, by Russia and Iran for 2 or 3 years at that point. Why? Because they were co-opted, right? The generals were bought out and they told their troops to run away and go home, right? They throw down your weapons. We saw the videos. We saw, them, and we saw the Russian troops that were still fighting at that point, driving by and cursing in Russian Mott in the strongest terms at the Syrian troops who weren't fighting. And at the point that Homs was reached, and there was a couple of Syrian military units, right? The Tiger forces, and I believe there was one other military unit that was fighting. It would be wrong to say that no one was, but not enough to resist the forces that were present, right? And as much as that was among the Syrian generals, it was also that way among the Syrian, local political level and everything. It was a mass, CIA, MI6, and overall Turkish intelligence penetration. The Turks had the forefront of all of this, much like what we saw Israel doing in Iran. Right, where we heard the recordings of generals getting calls and saying, you will leave the country and flee and make a video bad mouthing, or we'll kill your daughter and your wife because we know where they are. Right, that sort of thing. Right, bribery in some places, threats, blackmail in others, whatever it takes, to turn each individual person. Right, and really, this is what actually happened when the U.S. invaded Iraq. And at the end in Libya as well. They're very, very good at this. Turkey, I believe, took the lead here, but doubtless they had U.S. and British and possibly some Israeli support in all of this. And what that resulted is Russia and Iran at that point said, we can't fight if the Syrian military isn't fighting. So by Homs, which was the last before Damascus itself, the Russians were obviously, cutting a deal at that point to preserve their own forces in the country. Now, the idea that Russia has been completely cooperating and not interfering in Syrian domestic affairs, the Islamic State and the new Islamic State's affairs since, how does it play out then with those hundreds, thousands of Alawite and Christian refugees who have fled from Giuliani's genocidal gangs onto Russian bases? Is that part of the plan? I mean, that also no. This is just Erdogan's diplomacy towards Russia speaking through out of Giuliani's mouth. That's all. I don't hold much. Now, on the other hand, I have heard rumors that which I cannot confirm, that there is a plan for Giuliani to come to Moscow. and speak to Putin directly.
Really?
Which would be the head of a terrorist organization by Russian law. So I guess they're going to have to remove them from the terrorist list in Russia before that would happen. Again, I can't confirm that's going to happen. I saw a report. If it does, I will be sick to my stomach. It will be too much realpolitik for me to handle in that situation. I draw the line at Wahhabists. Sorry. But I'm not running Russia, so.
Wow. I mean, they really want their military base stationed there.
I think it's about far more than that, right? I think that there is a very long-term belief involved, right? Obviously, the game that was is over, and this is a new game, and that ultimately there will be some return to politics within Syria at some point. And Russia is confident that at the end that certain geopolitical truths of Syria's position via other countries in the region Russia has in various iterations defended Syria's sovereignty several times now against the West over multiple, and they lost the last round. They lost the peace, not the battle, but they obviously, I think, believe that there are certain geopolitical truths that will assert themselves through politics in Syria eventually, and that will, once again, one of the thing is money. Printing money. Russia still prints money for Syria. Russia supplies grain and oil and everything else. There's so many things that Syria needs from Russia.
So they're taking influence.
Give Russia leverage, yes, and be able to hopefully, direct some future Syrian government back towards something more that they can more palatably deal with. Again, I'm not saying I agree with that.
Yeah, just long-term strategy, just practical.
Well, it's realpolitik of the most cold-blooded sort at this point, and obviously has been since Homs.
Mark?
But again, the myth that Russia did nothing from the beginning is completely false because.
Oh no, of course it is. I mean,
outside Aleppo and everything, it was the Russians that were slowing Giuliani's Al Qaeda gangs down and so forth. So,
and obviously they would
wasn't enough Syrians.
Yeah,
and the Syrians who didn't fight have paid the price, right? The ethnic minorities whose communities are facing these genocide on the Alawite coast, in the Christian communities, the Druze, the Shia, all of that. They're now paying what was going to be the inevitable price of not fighting to defend a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional, however flawed united Syrian state. And ultimately, Syria is still divided. Remember. Yes. Because the U.S. and the Kurds still control the East, and now you could argue that Israel and the Druze that they've selected as their proxies control parts of the South. Right. The geopolitical game of the future division of Syria continues. Right, Syria will never be one country again.
Yes, kind of far more complicated. Mark, you're fantastic, man. I always appreciate you. I always say you are best in the business, and I mean it. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at MarkSleboda1, but you can also find him on Boosty, Boosty, Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda, or just put in his name, Mark Sleboda. He will appear. Definitely check him out. Check out his content. He is awesome. Thank you for this, Mark. I really appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me.
You have a good one. Bye-bye. All right. And I see my next guest. We're going to go from one damn good guest to another damn good guest. Kit Klarenberg. How you doing, Kit? You doing okay today?
Yeah, very well, very well. I'm glad that you put Mark and I on a par this time, rather than like significantly overhyping him over me like last time. You swine. No, I'm well. I'm the continuing to swelter in the enduring future and former Yugoslav heat. But aside from that, yeah, I'm doing pretty well.
What's the temperature there? I don't even know the temperature in that area. What's the temperature?
Oh, I mean, it's about 40 degrees, which is like well over 100, like Fahrenheit. So yeah, and it's very humid,
Yeah.
indeed. So I'm spending a lot of time indoors with the air conditioning on. But that doesn't mean I'm not keeping a close eye on geopolitical.
I didn't realize it got that hot there. I just assumed it was kind of like Europe, where the temperature starts to.
Well, it used to be considered part of the Middle East because it was part of the Ottoman Empire for many centuries. So its categorization as Southeastern Europe is actually quite new, but that's perhaps a discussion for another time.
Yeah. And just so the audience would know, Klarenberg, he's an investigative journalist, documenting the role of intelligence services in shaping politics perceptions. You can follow his work at Global Delinquents, the Gray Zone UK. And I think, as I pointed out last time, you had an article on Gray Zone proper. Thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate it. I always love to talk about your articles because you often do really good work. And one of the really interesting ones that caught my eye was this one: "The Spy Who Knew Too Much," effectively a neo-Nazi who knew too much. I'm sorry. And this is about Paraba. I think I always mess his name up, but it's Andre Parubi. That's it.
Parubi, yeah.
Parubi, yeah. This is the Nazi that was murdered. They found his killer pretty quickly. They had the video of him getting murdered, and it was pinned on an older gentleman who, very sad case, effectively was looking for his son, and in looking for his son, said if he could have got his hands on Poroshenko, he would have. Basically, he was looking out to kill anybody, and ultimately betrayed it to Russia after being prosecuted, so he can try to find either the body of his son or son proper. So, but your article makes the point of saying, yeah, it's more complicated than that. Step into that for me, because from the point of view,
so I think that Yeah, so I mean, I think the thing that really, Parubi, as we'll get into, is like in himself like a deeply suspicious figure, with a lot to hide, and with a lot of secrets, party to a lot of secrets that a lot of people would want kind of buried forever. But something that really jumped out to me was in the immediate aftermath of him getting shot, which is in August 30th, 2 weeks ago, just over 2 weeks ago now, a fellow Ukrainian lawmaker, and bearing in mind that Parubi's bit was a very significant and influential figure in Ukrainian politics for decades, despite his open neo-Nazi affiliations and ideology. A fellow lawmaker claimed that Parubi had been begging for formal protection from the SBU for months prior to his killing. Now, this quite understandably prompted some outcry, which led the SBU to issue a statement explaining why his demands for a dedicated security detail was declined. Curiously, though, a few days after this, a press conference was convened in which the SBU contradictorily claimed that he had never asked for protection. So that kind of got my antenna twitching quite a bit. And since then, I think the fact that this has just completely dropped off everyone's radar. I mean, I know that the pace at which events move presently is kind of unprecedented, and we've had since then a potential color revolution in Nepal and the killing of Charles Kirk. But this just like, you know, this was a guy who for decades had been at the forefront of Ukrainian politics. He was a key player in Maidan. He was the Speaker of Ukraine's parliament until 2019. He was a key point of contact between the Maidan government and NATO, and US and European officials. There was this avalanche of very glowing obituaries from US, British, and European diplomats and politicians, and you know, NATO spokespeople. But then it's just kind of vanished. And you know, as you mentioned, the very, very quickly, within just 3 days, his alleged killer was caught, and yes, claimed it was because that he had carried out this act arbitrarily. He just wanted to kill a state apparatchik, and that Perubi was within easy reach, and it was revenge because of his son having disappeared, presumed dead, while fighting in Bakhmut in 2023. Now, you might ask why it would take 2 years or more for him to seek to take revenge. And you know, this comes at a time when Zelensky is under enormous pressure by the Ukraine's small but terrifyingly influential and unabashedly murderous ultra-nationalist wing, who have openly stated that Zelensky's a dead man if he negotiates, despite the fact that, you know, the war is just done for Ukraine at this point. They're finished. Yeah, it comes at a time that is extremely, well, call it precipitous, or serendipitous from the perspective of the Zelensky government. But also, what you've got to bear in mind is that the Ukraine since 1991 has been the most corrupt country in Europe, and its legal system basically a joke. Yes. This became even worse somehow following the Maidan coup, and even worse again in the wake of martial law being implemented by Zelensky in the wake of the proxy wars eruption in February 2022. Now, this is something I've written about. It's gotten zero media coverage whatsoever. But the UN Human Rights Commissioner has issued a number of reports since the start of the proxy conflict, which have found that the SBU routinely engages in enforced disappearances and arbitrary detentions of people suspected of having Russian sympathies or residents of recaptured Ukrainian territory who were suspected of collaborating with Russians, which, you know, can include accepting food from Russian occupation soldiers. Now, yeah, that, like, I mean, in several cases, the UN has found that confessions to crimes elicited by from detainees by the SBU, they've been secured via beatings, electrocution, mutilation, sexual violence, threats of execution and rape, threats to their families, and that these poor people have very little, if not totally non-existent, access to legal representation, and national and local prosecutors have consistently rubber-stamped legally questionable, to say the least, detentions and convictions of accused Ukrainian citizens. Now, in this context, I don't think it's beyond the SBU to put someone up, kind of find someone who is a willing patsy, or maybe even one of their own agents, to carry this out, admit to it, say, "Oh yeah, I want to get swapped in a prisoner exchange with Russia," and yeah, you know, and then that's a very neat way of getting rid of Perubi while blaming Russia for it, like, even if tangentially. I mean, I'm not saying that I necessarily subscribe to that theory, and I try to avoid as much as possible engaging in speculation and conjecture, but it is very odd that this has completely vanished from any consideration whatsoever. You know, we don't know. I monitor Ukrainian media quite closely. It's completely dropped off their radar. We don't know where this assassin is being held. There is no indication of when he will be formally tried or formally sentenced, despite the fact that he has, openly admitted. And this is all just kind of disappeared. And I might add that, I go into this in my investigation, which I urge your viewers to read, of course, because it's brilliant. That in the immediate aftermath of Parubi being killed, there is a popular Ukrainian news outlet called Strana, which is typically kind of pro-government, because otherwise they would be in very serious trouble in the present milieu. They interviewed a number of his Parubi's associates, and most of them blamed the Kremlin for his murder, but others referenced the internal political background around his killing. There was a nameless source who told Strana, that Parubi could have been killed due to expectations of future political upheaval in Ukraine. After all, Parubi knew how to arrange a Maidan. Now, that's pretty extraordinary for an ostensibly pro-government Ukrainian media outlet to acknowledge. But Parubi was central to the Maidan coup in 2014 by token of setting up a body called the Maidan Self-Defense Group, which was ostensibly charged with protecting peaceful, quote-unquote, protesters from the attacks from riot police. But they worked in very close tandem with the openly neo-Nazi paramilitary group Right Sector, among others. The Right Sector routinely engaged in provocative, violent acts towards police to provoke responses, and then Western-funded media outlets in the country would then only report on the police response and frame it as unprovoked violence towards peaceful protesters. The allegations of Parubi's direct involvement in the Maidan sniper massacre in February 2014, questions about that have abounded for many, many, many years. The Sleboda, the neo-Nazi party that he ran for a while, he also ran its paramilitary unit, paramilitary wing, Patriot of Ukraine, which openly advocated violent insurrection in Ukraine and the purging of any and all Russians and Russian influence from the country. They took over Hotel Ukraine, which is in Freedom. What was then called Freedom Square is now called Maidan Square, and this was the site of the occupations and the vast anti-government demonstrations whipped up by the National Endowment for Democracy. A court case in, I believe it was October 2023, a court in Kiev finally made a ruling on the Maidan massacre. The trial had begun in 2016. I might add that its own investigators believe the government was trying to sabotage their work. So make of that what you will. But during this trial, which it found five police officers accused of complicity in the mass killings, one was acquitted, another was sentenced to time served, while three police officers who had been traded by Zelensky in 2019 were convicted in absentia. So that in effect means that no Ukrainian official from the time has ever been punished for this, key incident which led to the downfall of Yankovic. He fled the country thereafter, and the installation of a hand-picked, fascist-riddled interim government, courtesy of Victoria Nuland, who, of course, was in Freedom Square handing out motivational cookies to protesters, amongst other things. But the point is that during that very, very, very long trial, they heard copious witness evidence that shooting was of protesters was emanating from places like Hotel Ukraine and other buildings that were known to be occupied by Maidan protesters. There was particularly damning testimony from a Maidan self-defense commander and advisor to Parubi, who he got access to the officially collected evidence related to the massacre and conducted his own investigation, which included that third forces, quote unquote, linked to the Maidan protesters and their leadership were responsible for the mass shooting. And he concluded that Parubi and his underlings needed sacred victims in order to topple the government. Now, I mean, this is a guy who, on top of the fact that he was in, Parubi's right-hand man during this, he continues to support Maidan and continues to espouse ultra-nationalist views. So, I mean, that's quite
basically why would he lie? Is your point?
Yeah. I mean, he would have every reason to cover up Parubi's involvement. And yes, there was a large amount of evidence was heard that pointed away from government forces. And in the final judgment, acknowledged that yes, that the involvement of law enforcement in many of the shootings that the court investigated hadn't been proven, and that the involvement of other persons unknown couldn't be ruled out, which is a pretty extraordinary understatement. But it's like, I mean, Parubi's knowledge of what actually happened there, I mean, it extends even further to, I think that we may have even discussed the May 2014 Odessa massacre, which is, I mean, is another key flashpoint in the Maidan coup that leads to well, I mean, the burning to death of dozens of Russian-speaking Ukrainian citizens, and the injuring of hundreds more by fascist thugs who then went on to form neo-Nazi Azov battalion. This was what kicked off the civil war in Donbass, and we are kind of watching the results of that. We're kind of watching the conclusion of that in real time in Donbass now, over a decade later. But Parubi was in Odessa at the time. 500 members of his self-defense force have been dispatched to the city in advance of this horrific event, which does tend to suggest that the lethal incineration of all of these anti-Maidan activists was a deliberate, premeditated act of mass murder. And it's Ukraine lives with the legacy of this today. Now, on top of Parubi getting wiped out recently, last year in July 2024, Irina Farian, who is another representative of Sleboda and this completely rabid, insane Ukrainian ultranationalist who wanted anyone speaking Russian removed from the country and the language banned outright, even though Ukraine is a very similar language to Russian and is a subdialect of Russian. In effect, she was cheering the Odessa massacre and saying, "Let the devils burn in hell." She's also implicated in the Maidan massacre, and it seems that her room in Hotel Ukraine served as a sniper's nest during the shooting. She gets killed herself in July 2024, as I say. And this is despite the fact that she was under SBU surveillance at the time, because she was in serious legal hot water because she had criticised Azov battalion and saying that they weren't true Ukrainians because some of them speak Russian. Some of them speak Russian. And allegedly her killer was this young Ukrainian fascist who had been waiting outside her apartment building, monitoring her movements for many days before. So again, it's as I note in my piece, it's quite a convenient coincidence that so many people who could testify to these events and exactly the kind of forces who are against any form of negotiation or peace with Russia are dropping like flies.
That is,
it could be a coincidence. But
it's kind of a coincidence if that's the case. I mean, effectively, two people who knew too much, we can say it that way, effectively gets killed. I mean, Parubi was a political figure. He was part of parliament. I mean, this wasn't just a rando guy that gets taken out. You pointed out part of the Odessa massacres, part of the gunshots that murdered all those people for the sacrifice. He knows where the bodies are being held. I mean, so what is the thought that ultimately they're looking at a potential different government, that somebody was looking at Parubi talking? Like, meaning if all of this collapses, we have too many loose ends in regards to who knew about what was taking place in regards to the Maidan massacres. What is the thinking behind the peace? Like, what's the rationale for getting rid of these people? That they just know too much?
Well, I mean, that's one element of it, but like, you know, as I mentioned, you know, Zelensky finds himself in a bind now because you know, the war's over. Like Ukraine is finished. Like, Trump has openly stated Ukraine's not getting NATO membership. Rutte has said that, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, has said the same. Trump has ruled out the return of lost Ukrainian territory to Kiev. You know, it's quite clear that the US is stepping away from this, and Ukraine is basically dependent now on weapons bought from the US by the Europeans, of which there aren't that many left. They're reliant on drones, which Russia is increasingly getting better at countering, and they're also dependent on increasingly a large number of women, some of whom are pregnant, to fulfill frontline combat roles, because they have a terrible manpower shortage. And yet, despite this, Zelensky is publicly committed to all of these maximalist goals of returning Ukraine back to its 1991 borders and blah, 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 like, you know, all of this rubbish that we've heard so many times for so long, well, since the start of this at least. But yeah, that's clearly just for show, because, you know, anyone with a double-digit IQ at this point should be able to see that this is over. This is over now. But the reason for him maintaining this facade publicly is because, as I say, there have been numerous, you know, kind of far-right, ultra-nationalist elements who have as good as threatened him with a death sentence if he even negotiates with Russia. And this is one of the reasons that that there's been, you know, no movement whatsoever on the negotiations. On the negotiation front, on the talk front, because, you know, Russia has a very, very clear set of objectives and demands, and they are winning and in a position of power. But Ukraine is unwilling to budge on anything. The reason for that is because this would probably lead to Zelensky's murder and a palace coup. Now, I see Zelensky, who, after he was removed as the Ukraine's military chief and appointed ambassador for London, took lots of smiling selfies with members of Azov and right sector, making clear where his affinities lie, you know, and who he looks to as allies. He's recently been getting profiles in the Western media as the kind of next leader of Ukraine, which is as good as saying that Zelensky is basically toast from the perspective of certain elements of the Western power structure. So in this context where, like, for Zelensky to survive, he basically has, if Zelensky's in this bind where if he negotiates, he's dead, but if he doesn't, then the country's dead. So there is perhaps an element of picking off, or needing to pick off, people who A, yes, know too much, but B, would be at the forefront of demands that the war, it just keeps going. I mean, what's his name? Andrei Beletsky, who is the founder of Azov Battalion, in an August interview with the Times of London, he was very critical of Zelensky, and he said we're not negotiating anything with Russia at all, and he outlined his personal vision for the future of just perpetual war with Russia. Like, we're just where they just keep fighting Russia indefinitely, which is, you know, literally impossible. You know, it's not going to happen. They already, according to the Ukrainian government's own estimations, which may be wildly off, and misleading. They've only got 40% of 40% of their pre-war population has been lost. They're running out. They're literally running out of people, and we're getting to kind of Battle of Berlin level children being taught how to use guns and being sent into battle with advancing Russian forces. I mean, it's complete madness. But it's like, I do think that like in order to survive, Zelensky is going to need to make concessions, and there is, a significant undercurrent. It's very overt. Like, there is a significant and highly influential strand of Ukrainian ultra-nationalist thinking, which is no negotiations, fight to the death. And the Parubi himself, actually, when the war started, he argued against reaching any kind of peace settlement, and he said that Ukraine should just destroy Russia, and just keep fighting forever.
Just to interrupt real quick, your point is that all things being equal, that Zelensky knows the writing is on the wall on some level, and if he wants to be able to, let's say, retain his life, his ability to breathe, in this physical matter reality, that there are certain people that he needs to get rid of, otherwise he is toast. Is that the thought?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, and I think as well that, like, we're seeing, even if the EU with its foreign policy apparatus completely dominated by utterly insane ultra-nationalists from the ever yapping Baltics. He's there was recently like Radek Sikorski, who he was a key. This is the guy who tweeted. He's now the Polish foreign minister. He was the guy who tweeted "Thank you USA" after Nord Stream 2 got blown up. And he was a very, very, very key supporter of the Maidan coup, and I have been told by various informed sources that he had at least previously worked for MI6, Britain's foreign intelligence agency. That he recently at a conference in Kiev, he basically stated that, like, well, Poland is not in a position to give security guarantees to Ukraine, and no other country is either, because that means declaring war on Russia. And nobody's willing to actually do that. So, and he kind of, just acknowledged that, that Ukraine has been used as this beachhead to try and destroy Russia. It hasn't really worked. That Ukraine is not going to be joining NATO. It's not going to get all of these baubles that it was promised in return for provoking its historic ally and massive neighbor. That it's basically just, it's going to be hung out to dry in the end. So, I mean, it's quite remarkable for someone like Sikorski to spell that out so openly. And I think that, Ukrainians themselves, they're not stupid. Like, they understand that they've been, in the words of, I believe, John Mearsheimer, led up the primrose path on this. And I mean, if you look, there was a Gallup poll at the start of August which showed that 70%, or close to 70%, of Ukrainians supported immediate negotiations to end the war. But they just want this over now because the country's a smouldering wreckage. So it's a very, very difficult situation where, on the one hand, you have the battlefield reality pointing to total defeat and collapse. The overwhelming majority of what remains of Ukraine's much diminished population demanding peace immediately, and then this small but yes very powerful and dangerous coterie of neo-Nazis and fascists who are not going to allow the war to end. And also could very well seek to take revenge on European powers for stabbing them in the back and not helping them win, even if as if this was ever a remotely realistic goal. So yeah, I believe the technical term is a shit show.
That's an understatement. That's an understatement. Because look, every day that the war continues is one day Zelensky still breathes. And he has to know that they would string him up on a flagpole the moment that he accepts any deal that's coming out of Russia. Meaning, regardless of the public saying overwhelmingly, stop this war, just make a deal, stop the war. the people who are in the leadership and that small group of Nazis that are effectively in positions of power are effectively controlling the political space on some level. They have some agency, not to mention European powers that are pushing them to kind of keep this war going, meaning the people who are in a position in the war are not really in a position in the war. And Zelensky, for all of the talk, doesn't really have, let's say, the political dexterity to make it out alive and to make overtures for some kind of peace. No, I see where you're coming from with it. I understand your take on it. And just so the audience, just so they know, this is the article that Kit wrote. Definitely check it out. It is very interesting. Neo-Nazi who knew too much. You can find it on Global Delinquents website. Kit, thank you for this, man. Always appreciate you joining me. Always appreciate your articles and your breakdowns.
Always a pleasure, Jamal. Thanks so much for having me on, brother.
Absolutely, man. Kit Klarenberg, he is an investigative journalist documenting the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. You can find Kit's work on Global Delinquents, The Gray Zone UK, and as I pointed out, he was even on The Gray Zone proper. Have a good one, man. Be safe. All right. We are joined with, I think, a new guest. I don't think I've ever had you on this show. Dan Cohen. How you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm good. Getting my morning going. I've never been on. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Which is like getting your morning donut. Dan Cohen, he's a journalist, filmmaker. He has contributed to Al Jazeera English, Alternate, Electronic Intifada, Gray Zone, Middle East, Mondoweiss, The Nation, Vice News, Mint Press. You've been around, to put it mildly. You've been around. Let me ask you this. I didn't hit. There's a tweet that you responded to, and I kind of want to dig into the tweet because I'm interested in this aspect of Charlie Kirk's death. I've been fascinated by the way each side has been trying to use him as a cudgel to hit the other side. It's almost like there wasn't a real person. That a lot of what has been put out has been this kind of deification or just desecration. And depending upon the side that you're on, using that club to beat the head of the other side. It is very weird. It's very strange. The images that they've come out with Jesus taking Charlie Kirk away to somewhere. Like all of this stuff is very strange. It's very bizarre. Let's start there though. Give me your take on this. And just to give reference point, it was this tweet that you were responding to from Sarah Bills. Right here. It says, Sarah says, why was Charlie giving multiple members of the Trump administration his, quote, final wishes before he died? First Miller, now Noam. And you point out, it says, because they're following the same script. Once you see that they're national security state actors, then you can't unsee it. We are governed by highly paid liars via cable TV, social media, and podcasts. And just to be clear, Sarah wasn't saying that he knew he was going to die. His point was, how are all of these people all of a sudden bringing this up as if, I was the last person to talk to Charlie and Charlie told me X or Y. Break down your comment for me.
I think, so my comment that these are national security state actors. I mean, well, Sarah firstly was pointing out that the Homeland Security Secretary, what's her name? The former governor of like one of the,
Noam?
Yeah, Kristi Noem.
Yeah.
And then who was the other one? JD Van. Who was the other person she was referring to?
It was, let me see. It was Kristi Noem and it was
Miller, Stephen Miller,
yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
Both said that he sorry, I have to switch my brain from a completely different subject that I was just working on. Both said that Charlie Kirk had told them right before he was killed that he was, we need to crack down on the terrorist left, things like that. That's not an exact quote, but which is obvious, fodder for just right wing. Everyone, the kind of narrative that the left is crazy and they celebrate killing and we need to crack down on them. And, and they're not only they celebrate killing, but they're killers even. Yeah. And that, so what my point, and Sarah said, look, they're saying the same thing, which is very strange. And she clarified, I'm not saying that Charlie Kirk knew he was going to die, but it's strange that they're both saying this. And my point is, yes, these people are scripted. They are saying that for a very specific political reason. Yes. Kristi Noem was put in that position. You know, if you look at, she's a grandmother, but she got like a nice haircut, got like plastic surgery, got Botox.
Kristi Noem is a grandmother? Are you serious?
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. She's an older lady. I mean, she's into her 60s, I believe.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
And they made her kind of like, you know, hot, quote unquote. You know, they tried to make her like look physically attractive and put her in this position as Homeland Security for this theater where she goes out with like ICE agents and cracks down on criminals and like does all these appearances on social media in particular. Okay. Stephen Miller is saying the same thing. So this is clearly a script that went out. And my point is, I think actually a fundamental thing that people need to understand. Yeah, you can see like, you know, that
she's 60.
I mean, we can look up exactly Kristi Noem age. Oh, sorry, she's 53, so she's not 60, but she is a grandmother.
She still looks good for 53. Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, if you look at pictures of her like from before, if you look up Kristi Noem, like age, you can find pictures of her from before where she looks much more plain, like homely.
She looks her age. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, and she got plastic surgery. Clearly, she clearly does like Botox, you know, lip enhancements, these kind of things. That's not just because of vanity. That's because they're trying to market her for you know, kind of conservative audiences to bring them into this whole like MAGA farm and support Trump. So, you know, having like a good looking older woman to go and do these appearances on social media where she's out there with the ICE agents, getting the criminals, this kind of thing, that is all propaganda. And it's a theater is how I describe it. National security state theater. And really, this is the main thing that I think people on all sides of the political spectrum have to understand about social media. We just assume that, you know, like, yeah, they're like social media is pretty normal. Like we have our X accounts, we have our whatever, Instagram, whatever you use. I mean, in particular, you know, a lot of people I think who are in journalism, who are in our spheres, use X in particular. But we are kind of under this sort of illusion that there is some amount, there's free speech or some amount, or it was censored, but Elon restored it. And even if we don't really like Elon and his politics, now we have free speech because a lot of the people who were banned, you know, were brought back, and, you know, it's a place of free exchange and all these things. When in reality, it is not only is this a corporate platform, it is military grade social engineering made to it where there is a lot of inorganic activity and scripted national security state actors that are difficult to identify and that are put in place to rise at certain points in order to kind of steer how people think, in order to engineer their mind. Right. Because the most important thing is this, you know, our consciousness. That's what they're really fighting for. How we think, how we perceive reality, and then that, you know, determines what we do with our day-to-day on a day-to-day basis. What political, you know? So
such a good point.
So the thing is, if you know, the more we get good, quote unquote, at social media, the more we build a big following, and, you know, we feel like we're interacting with important people, maybe some journalist who, you used to like you really look up to, and all of a sudden they're favoriting and retweeting your posts, and maybe you're DMing with them or this, a lot of that is so incredibly easy to manipulate. For example, I'll give an example. The account Syrian girl, Maram Susli, she's Australian Syrian. She said, well, Charlie Kirk followed me recently on X, and that is proof that he was changing his position on Israel. Now, and that went viral. That got like several thousand retweets and many more likes. Charlie Kirk follows like I think it was like 185,000 people on Twitter, on X.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That guy just follows like literally anything.
Yeah.
So number one, if that is somehow meaningful, I just don't see it. I think that's at best, I would say, wishful thinking.
Yeah, it's her take. It's her point of view. It's like her little window.
Right. And secondly, especially, bigger figures like Charlie Kirk, they're not spending all day like a lot of social media users who are really good at X. They're not spending all their time on social media. He's like a political actor. He's, flying here and running Turning Points USA or, and this kind of thing. So there are people that manage those accounts. So there's no, even if, so there's no indication that Charlie Kirk himself, it was Charlie Kirk's account. Could be run by literally anybody. Could be run by his assistant, his hired social media intern. It could be run by somebody directly working in the national security state. And this is the kind of thing where it's like, oh, Charlie Kirk's following me. He must be having some kind of change. Oh, he's, so this is the point that I'm trying to make, is that all of these platforms, not only X, TikTok, Facebook, they're for different generations. Now it's like boomers who use Facebook. It's like a lot of kids who use TikTok and, Instagram and YouTube, and Rumble is now the like alternative platform, but Rumble is like another one that this is, they can make certain podcasts or shows rise to be, all of a sudden you're getting you're the one that's out front to get tens of thousands of viewers or whatever live. So all of this is basically an invented reality in many ways, and it's very difficult. It's like WWE or WWF, where like, it's how do we know what's fake and what's real? Like it's scripted, but there are things that are happening that are real, but we don't know. And the overwhelming majority of social media users do not understand the level to which it is scripted, and these political actors and political of the single uniparty that rules this country these people are following scripts. The national security state is thinking generations ahead in its plans of what it wants to do. You and I are reacting to the news on a daily basis of what's happening. We are not understanding there is a major long-term agenda. And the big question, of course, what are those agendas? And that's a huge question. But my point is, social media is their terrain. It is their theater. It is their matrix. It is not ours, and it is not a public square that they just kind of bought and are making money off of. It is their form of controlling our minds.
Yeah, I used to be a software engineer. I was a software engineer for like 10 years. Any platform that there's a layer of code between you and that platform, I can control. And I say that to say, whether you have sock puppet accounts, whether you have certain algorithms that push certain things over other things, those things are manipulated or can be manipulated in a way that serves certain agendas. So yeah, you're right. It's not reality in the reality sense of the word. There's always a space. There's a rift between you trying to hit at reality versus the code base that's there to give you, let's say, a view, a take on what that reality is. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, I give you, especially political actors, they tend to be on script. So, for example, you had all of the drones that go into Ukraine, and then all of a sudden you see 80 on my site, maybe like 30 internet sites coming up saying Donald Trump is weak. Donald Trump allows NATO to be attacked. And they're saying almost the exact same thing with maybe a different tone, a different letter, a different word here or there. They're on script. They have a very specific agenda of what they want to accomplish in referencing that particular event, creating hysteria around that particular event, trying to get a following on that particular event to get it to bubble up on the side of the thing. Those people, they know that these weren't, this wasn't an attack on NATO. That doesn't stop them from pushing it out there in order to try to pull Donald Trump in a particular direction. It's scripted, agreed. And it's not just that, it could be all sorts of things. I mean, Cuban Twitter, if you remember, where I think the CIA created this kind of Twitter-like thing that they control, that they wanted to use to try to overthrow this Cuban state. It only got like 30 or 40,000 people on it. But even that, it's like 30, 40,000 people on a device created by the CIA to overthrow Cuba. It's like this stuff. I agree with you. No, I totally agree with you. I don't think people look at it in those terms, though.
Let me add something. I mean, yeah. So like people understand, a lot of anti-imperialists know about that episode in particular. Well, yeah, that episode in particular where they had that, Twitter kind of thing that they operated. I think it was like Zunzuneo or something like that in Cuba to overthrow the government. Social media was clearly a weapon for regime change. So if it is a weapon for regime change and social engineering against Cuban sovereignty, well, what does that mean that we are using it every day? How are we being engineered in a far more sophisticated way than it, was like a decade or so ago? Another thing I might point out about that is the idea that, okay, so like we all see that there are coordinated groups of liars. October 7th, perfect example, the 40 beheaded babies hoax, these kinds of things where like everyone who is paying attention or is critical basically saw that as an basically obvious hoax and saw that it was coordinated. That was very clearly, I mean, we know that came from Netanyahu's office and was handed out, that was very obvious. So we know these things happen, and those are the most obvious ones. What I would suggest, the example that you gave about like these drones into Poland, in order to convince Donald Trump to be more aggressive towards Russia or whatever, I think that the idea that Donald Trump is has these anti-interventionist instincts and is pushed by hawks very well could be and probably is part of the script.
Yes.
That's the national security state script, because at no point, because Donald Trump speaks from both sides of his mouth all the time. He says, we don't seek regime change in Iran. We don't want war. We're going to negotiate with them. And then he uses those negotiations to give Israel the element of surprise for Israel to launch this war, which then Trump, of course, supports in every way, and then actually even joined in. The same thing with Hamas. The U.S. was, we got really tired of Joe Biden. Everyone's, Trump is here. We got the temporary ceasefire. And then negotiations with Hamas, and this is great. And wow, finally some sense here. And then the element of surprise, boom, So that to me is that's coordinated. That's not an accident. That's not
Soleimani.
Exactly. Precisely. Yes. They got those guys together. Boom. Hit them. So these are the same. These are scripts, national security state scripts. This is not happening again and again by accident. And if it were one time, that Trump got played or got rolled, then I'd say, okay, that might carry some water. This idea that, he's being pressured like that. But the reality, I think, fool me once, shame on you, right? Fool me like 30 times, like then at some point, I'm just a goldfish, like going into the, the side of the bowl again and again, like think. And that's basically, I think, where we're at. And people who, and I'm not, accusing you of this, obviously, but like even myself, for a long time, I really thought that, yeah, like Trump really does have these anti-interventionist instincts. Like he sells it really well. And I think this is broadly accepted in anti-imperialist thinking.
Oh, I don't know why.
But
I gave him the benefit of the doubt when he first got in office and was like, all right, let's see what he does. But then you're bombing Yemen. You're trying to attack Venezuela. You just murdered 11 people in a Venezuelan boat. We just found out about the North Koreans that he murdered.
Right.
I mean, you can go down the list on these things. This is not a person who's anti-interventionist. He may be trying to do it on the cheap, but anti-interventionist, no.
And he sells it quite well. I mean, it's like, in this, but Biden said, Palestinians have human rights or something. And AOC says, finally she said like genocide or something or whatever, Biden and AOC, Genocide Joe, and, the future of the Democratic Party and AOC don't care. Like, these people are scripted national security state actors. With Biden, it was too obvious. With Kamala, it was too obvious. That's why she lost, because she couldn't sell the story to the public. Trump is a great actor. I mean, he's been in, he was in Home Alone. He was in he did like pro wrestling appearances. Yes. This guy is really an actor. And if you look at who created the image of Donald Trump as a sort of conservative, populist billionaire who really just kind of hates the establishment and stick it to them, it was Steve Bannon.
Yes.
Steve Bannon, the former Goldman Sachs banker who crafted Donald Trump's strategy. He was his media strategist, and he basically engineered his campaign to get him into the White House. Yes. And Donald Trump is really a longtime Democrat. There's a quote from him in like 2006 or 2005 where he says, "I identify as a Democrat," as if it's like an identity thing. And so he's a longtime Democrat, a corrupt New York City real estate mogul who was given everything and is just a kind of disgusting, dirty guy who is everything that conservative, rural, Bible thumping America hates, reviles. But somehow this guy, they put a red hat that says "Make America Great Again" and fashioned him into this image and sold it to middle America. And that mirage, that script is still in play right now.
Agreed. I think, though, if I'm being honest with you, I don't think Donald Trump would have won. He had no political opposition in real sense. Like, even now, does he have any real political opposition? It's almost as if the Democrats went with this idea that Donald Trump is Satan, Donald Trump is the devil, Donald Trump is Mussolini, he's Hitler, he's going to put Liz Cheney against the wall and shoot her in the face. Right. So you shouldn't vote for Trump. We have all this lawfare that was effectively used. And then when he wins, you have nothing to fall back on. You threw any and everything that you can think of. You as hysterical as you can be. They say never go full retarded. Well, they went full retarded. And at the end of it all, he's still standing. And so at that point, it's like, okay, well, what do you have else to throw at him? You've done everything. You've tried to throw him in jail. You've called him everything but a child of God. You hit him with everything but the kitchen sink. And none of it worked. And he was able to get this kind of political coalition of Republicans where he could consolidate his political power with effectively the Republicans. Now, they may have limits, especially if Trump is like, hey, I need you guys to sign a deal to end the Ukraine war. They're going to tell Trump to F off. But in regards to just basic politics, Trump has been able to consolidate power and destroy his political opposition. It's not like Democrats are like, here's the plan that we're going along with, and here's the policies. And there's nothing coming out of them. Nothing at all.
Let me put this out there.
Yeah.
So the opposition, the Democratic opposition to Trump, from when he was a candidate until and immediately when he got into power, of course, when he won, immediately they launched Russiagate.
Right.
Now, for anybody who was, watching critically and wasn't being partisan, you could see that it was obviously phony from the start. And what did it do? It strengthened Trump in the eyes of middle America. Was that part of the script? Was that intended to fail, to make Donald Trump look better?
Oh, you think all of this is theater? You think that this is just Punchy Judy with somebody pulling the strings for the Punchy Judy parts?
Steve Bannon is deeply connected in Hollywood. Where did Trump derangement syndrome come from?
Hillary Clinton wanted to find a way in order to
Russiagate.
Make herself. Yeah, and Russiagate was a way to do it.
You're talking about Russiagate. Okay.
Yeah.
Which, I brought up Russiagate, obviously. Okay. Russiagate, obviously, Hillary Clinton and intelligence agencies.
Right.
Now, did Donald Trump ever really deviate from what Hillary Clinton would have done, or what the intelligence agencies, what the deep state, the establishment wanted him to do? No.
Maybe.
So,
we don't know that. I mean, keep in mind, Hillary Clinton was talking about putting air defense in Syria. Hillary Clinton was easily going to get further involved in Ukraine without any issue. Donald Trump
did that. When Obama was president, of course, the Maidan coup happened.
Right.
Trump came in, and Obama said, "I will only send defensive weapons to Ukraine.
Right.
I'm not going to send lethal weapons." Trump said, "No, we're sending lethal weapons." He escalated it. Biden. Why?
Because just to be clear, it wasn't in a vacuum. They were screaming bloody murder that Donald Trump was effectively an errand boy for Vladimir Putin. That everything that he did.
He's the president. Why does he have to listen to what the screeching Democrats are saying? Like, at that point, he had won.
Seriously? I mean, come on. You know that these guys, when they are under political pressure, what he was. I mean, they were literally trying to impeach him. They impeached him twice. First time was nonsense. Second one was fair game. I guess I'm saying I don't think it's not unreasonable when a massive wave of political pressure is being applied. Hell, they even had an investigation. If Mueller would have found anything, they would have taken Donald Trump out on a rail and put him in a cage.
And that's exactly, they found nothing. All of it failed. All the impeachments, all of the Russiagate stuff, it all failed, and it all consolidated him as the man. It brought him back to the White House again. I agree
with you on that. I'm just pointing out that human beings do respond to political pressure, and anything that Trump did, they were trying to get Donald Trump.
You and I are subject to pressure, but like the halls of power, like they don't give a shit how much we demonstrate against against the genocide or the coup in Venezuela. None of that makes a bit of difference. We could be out there, unless we are actually stopping the machinery, physically blocking it from happening. We can protest all day long. They do not care. Biden didn't care. Trump doesn't care. You and I are subject to like what our peers and what people think about us. Like that influences us. Those powerful, the U.S. government doesn't care. The Republicans don't care if they call him Putin's puppet and say there's a P tape. They can say that all they want. And if you look at what I was going to say before, if you look at Trump, the whole phenomenon of Trump derangement syndrome,
right?
Think about Kathy Griffin beheading Trump. Remember that?
Bloody stump of Trump.
Right. All that kind of stuff. If you watch, The View, a lot of that came from like Hollywood and media personalities, and especially Hollywood. Steve Bannon is deep in Hollywood. He was a Hollywood producer for years. After he left Goldman Sachs, he was in Hollywood for several years working on documentaries, where he was the executive producer of numerous documentaries. He has stakes in production firms. He's connected to like Seinfeld, the Seinfeld show, for example. Like, he is deep in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Trump derangement syndrome, those kind of antics came from Hollywood. And what does it do? It makes middle America look at these insane Hollywood liberals and be like, they want to behead our president. Like, yeah, I don't love Trump. He's kind of, sleazy, but like, look at these, this guy's changing. This guy's really changing. Just the same way that Charlie Kirk was really changing. What I'm saying. I'm just at a point where I just see this stuff, and there's very compelling evidence that this stuff is scripted. These are scripts.
I don't doubt that some of it is scripted. You would have my complete agreement on some of it.
It's hard to tell when it's hard to tell where the distinction is between. Okay, part of it is the script can change.
Yeah.
It's like a choose your own adventure kind of thing. Like the script has to correspond to reality, or else it's not gonna work.
Rejected. Right.
Yeah. So, like, did they want Donald Trump to win? I don't know. Maybe they would have been perfectly happy if Hillary Clinton won. Did they want? You know what I mean?
Leaving out incompetence, like meaning these people may just be stupid too. Like, if you get my point, like when they're going after Donald Trump and they're using Hillary Clinton is going with this whole Russiagate stuff, and intelligence state goes with the whole Russiagate stuff, and the stuff gets stovepiped into the FBI where they have an investigation. As a person, just as a human being, that's pressure. That is political pressure, where they are trying to rip you out of office, and anything that they can do to rip you out of office, and anything that they find, every narrative at that point that's created goes under this model of Trump is doing this because he's working with Putin. So it's like, well, Trump doesn't put sanctions on Putin for stealing the election because he's working with Putin, as opposed to the common sense thing of, well, if you pass sanctions on Russia for stealing the election, it implies that Donald Trump didn't win the election on his own. But everything was put under that lens. Even the whole, well, why doesn't Trump give offensive weapons? Well, obviously he's working with Putin. Like, none of the stuff was necessarily associated with reality, but all of it was fit through a context. I'm saying that Trump, like any other person, is stuck with the gravity of that context. And you can see the effect on him now. When Donald Trump is going out and giving press briefings, and he spends like 15 minutes saying, well, I put in javelins, I've been difficult on Putin, I passed sanctions, I did all of this. He's not saying that for his health. He's saying that because he is still stuck with this idea that some people believe that he was working with the Russians, and anything that he does in that context needs to be somehow justified by showing how much of a badass he was towards the Russians. It bit into him. I'm saying I agree with you that some of the stuff is scripted, but the behavior is getting across something else. Like, this is not like Trump reading a script. This is Trump dealing with, for all intents and purposes, seemingly trauma of that first term of the shit that they were throwing at him. Tell me if you think I'm wrong on this.
I think this is a case of, again, fool me once, shame on me, shame on you.
Right.
Where, like, in the first term, I was on the same page with what you're saying. Like, they're pressuring him all the time, and he doesn't really want. He even met with Putin and all this stuff, but like Trump, Trump is a candidate. I mean, of course, it's candidate talk, but I'm going to end the Ukraine war on the first day. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, honestly, you could end the Ukraine war quite easily if you wanted to. But he's like announcing new sanctions all the time. And then he says, "This is Biden's war. This is Biden's war. This isn't my war." He says that's like his go-to every time. That is obviously a script. That's obviously like a rehearsed thing for him to say.
Yeah.
This is Biden's war. Like, no, this is your war, and it was your war when you decided to sent offensive weapons in your first term, and you escalated it. So this is a bipartisan. This is a uniparty war. This is not, just a Democrat thing.
Agreed.
You were campaigning with Lindsey Graham at the same time that you were telling people, like, I just see this as like right wing Obama.
Yeah, he was lying to his team.
But it's like right wing Obama. That it's like people were tired of Bush, and we got this like country ass idiot who is clearly like stupid and went to war on Iraq on a series of lies, and we shed all this blood and treasure and killed all these Iraqis. And now we get like a good looking, like black dude as a time when identity politics are becoming like more important. And wow, we have like a minority as president. And, you know, and he says like change and all this stuff. And like people were immensely hopeful. Yes. And it was a huge letdown. He was the quintessential establishment candidate. And it's the same thing with Trump. It's like, these are the, you know, generational kind of scripts that I'm saying, that it's like, okay, you know, we have this goal that we want to do, say 50 or 100 years or whatever it is. This is what we're trying to do. How are we going to maintain this theater until then? Okay, we need to invade this country. We need to invade this country. We need to roll out this program domestically, blah, 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 blah. Look at these social phenomenons. Like, it's like, that's how they see us. And we have to keep the image of democracy. And sometimes we have to make this party look really stupid and crazy so we can have this one rise. Like, I'm, you know, I just see it.
They, in this case,
that's a great question.
I can craft the exact same thing with individual actors. Like, meaning you have a moneyed interest that pushes on political parties to do X or Y. The money interest pays for both. So you get this kind of weird uniparty thing in the way that it functions or operates, even though they have to mouth certain things from their own constituencies, even though ultimately they back very similar policies. Like, I don't need a they for that in that case.
Right.
You get Donald Trump having the go at Jeb Bush and then leans into the whole anti-war thing, even though obviously he's still trying to do primacy for the United States, regardless of what comes out of his mouth. Mm-hmm. You get Joe Biden, who's like, oh, I'm working tirelessly to stop the war. Okay, no, you're not, dude. You're just lying. Like, some of this stuff is just them doing this stuff for political expedience to get from point A to point B. I don't know. For one, I don't think the U.S. has 50 years. For them, they can plan out whatever they want. I don't think this is going to last 50 years. And I don't know.
Well, maybe they want to destroy the U.S. as we know it, like balkanize it, you know? Or
that's the other interesting point. Did you read the article? And we can end on this one. Well, the guy, I think it was a Russian guy, who was pointing out that Trump's plan is to devalue the dollar, that the debt is so high that it is impossible to pay back. And so the goal is to get all of these countries on cryptocurrency where the debt can be manipulated in a way where the dollar can be devalued to such a degree where the U.S. can, at that point, basically you're crashing the U.S. market, crashing the U.S. economy.
I didn't read that. No, it's a compelling argument. I would love to read that.
Yeah, I need to find the article for it.
I would. Let me say one more kind of.
Please.
One more thing about that. I think one of the big reasons for COVID, in fact, was you brought up the national debt and we're talking about, you know, what are the long-term plans of like our ruling class. COVID, obviously, I mean, and this is, you know, we could talk about this for like an hour easily. If you look at our population pyramid of the and especially population pyramids in the West in general, but not only in the West, also in China and Russia and Japan. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about, of course, the United States. We have a rapidly aging population. The boomers are dying out. They are causing a huge strain on the healthcare system. They are not producing and contributing to the tax base. And, you know, our generation, I'm 40 now, I guess, you know, I don't know how old you are, somewhere.
I'm ancient. I'm much more ancient than you are.
Really? Oh, congratulations, bro.
I just had a birthday. August 31st. I'm 48.
All right. Congratulations. But like our generation and, you know, younger than us, we're not having as many kids. Right. Obviously, our population is not growing. We have basically an inverted population. You know, a healthy population pyramid looks like this, a triangle, a lot of young people, a lot of babies aging, you know, and people die often. Okay. Ours is basically the opposite. And they've been seeing for decades, they've been able to see that the boomers, post World War II, everyone has a lot of kids, are going to become burdens on the system. And everyone's been saying Social Security is gonna, can't pay for this. Social Security is not going to exist when, you and I retire. And our national debt is enormous. Now, COVID, with what I argue is a fake pandemic, a pandemic that did not actually happen, but was projected through social media, through cable TV, but especially social media, was used to kill a lot of, in particular, older people in order to sculpt those population pyramids to keep the system intact, and to keep this whole thing going. And this is actually not my theory. I can't take credit for this at all. If you want to talk to one of the most interesting people I know, this is the theory, the observation of a guy named Jonathan J. Cooey, who was an academic. He was an academic biologist working at the University of Pittsburgh, who was fired for pointing out that the COVID shots were actually an old technology that biologists use all the time called transfection, that it wasn't a new technology at all. And he was basically researching on his own, doing all kinds of research and streaming on his own to figure out what's going on with the pandemic. He was then hired by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. RFK brought him on to help him write his book, The Wuhan Lab Leak, or The Wuhan Cover-Up, which is all, the case that the COVID-19 came from the Wuhan lab. Yeah. And in the middle of writing that, Cooey realized the whole thing doesn't even make sense, that the thesis that COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 was a novel virus, came from a laboratory, or was even a novel virus at all, didn't make any sense. And we were being fooled. We were being lied to that there was a pandemic. When he went to RFK to say this, this is what I figured out, RFK fired him.
Yeah.
Now, RFK doesn't have the scientific literacy to be able to evaluate that argument. He just told him this isn't the place for that. So it's like he hired him to write this book. He hired this scientist to write the book. And then the scientist came and said, no, we got it all wrong. And he's like, you're out. Now, RFK, of course, was brought in as he's now Trump's Secretary of Health and Human Services. Right. That is part of a script, is what I'm saying. So, I highly recommend you interview Cooey on this.
Yeah, I disagree with you on that. I'll be blunt. I just disagree with you. I mean, I've known too many people who died from COVID for it to not be real. I don't know how social media was killing people with COVID. I would say it that way. Well,
that's why I said this would be a long conversation to get into. But I mean, what I can say, okay, I'll give you a clear example. It took me a couple of years to figure this out. When I was, I got the shots. At first, I was paying attention to what's going on in China as an anti-imperialist, and I was like, man, this is really serious. We need to be masking. No one's masking around here. This is crazy. We need to lock down. Look, China locked down, and they're beating the virus. And I'm telling you, I came from the complete other side. I was what I would say was completely taken in. It took me when I started to realize maybe this is not what it appears, is I saw and I can show you all this stuff, but the U.S. government issued, the FDA, I believe in particular, issued a new protocol for how a death certificate is written. Normally, how a death certificate has always been written in this country is it is a medical opinion. So you can have all kinds of medical opinions, right? It's a medical opinion from either a doctor, but usually it's like a coroner or something like that.
Right.
And how it works is you have it's a sequence of events that led to the death. So you have the immediate cause of death, and that is a sequence that leads back to like the underlying cause of death. So say you died of, some viral, some infection. Well, you died of that infection. That's the immediate cause of death because your body couldn't fight it because you had, cancer.
Something else going on. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And so
I see what you mean.
And so
like the underlying cause of death was cancer, but the virus was the thing that actually did the
right.
coup de
And
grace.
what actually killed you at that moment. But so it's like something that you and I or anyone with a healthy, normal immune system could fight off because you were very sick with cancer or heart disease or diabetes or whatever it is. You couldn't do that. Your body couldn't fight it off. So what goes into the records, is the underlying cause of death. Now, the FDA, I believe it was the FDA, I have to look to be sure, but I'm pretty sure it's the FDA, issued orders in February, March of 2020 that instructed hospitals, coroners, all of these that deal with death certification, and it's mostly not doctors who deal with death certification, by the way. It instructed them to completely change how a death certificate is written. So now, firstly, the immediate cause of death is what you should focus on, not the underlying cause of death. And secondly, anywhere that COVID-19 is listed, that will be considered the underlying cause of death. And this is only applied to COVID-19. Right. So like for everything else, it's the same protocol. But for this specific thing, we've completely flipped upside down and then said anywhere COVID is found, we're going to call that a COVID death.
I know, but by definition, that means COVID was real.
No. I'm saying that according to what I'm saying. Okay, hold on, let me get there. So if I'm not saying that doesn't mean that it's real. It means that what they are saying is we want you to change how you count completely in a completely different way. Yeah. Now, if you look at that, doesn't mean COVID was real. What I would say is that they were testing for things that were not a novel virus. What they were finding were things that already exist all over the place. They were using PCR tests, which no one knows. Did you ever know what a PCR test is? Do you know what PCR stands for to this day?
I knew at one point. I don't remember now. Keep in mind, the COVID thing was a while back.
I'm not trying to call you out, but what I'm saying is myself too. I'm like, we're sticking these things up our nose. All of a sudden, overnight, it's accepted that this thing called a PCR test, which no one knows what the hell that even stands for, let alone what it actually is scientifically. We don't have the scientific literacy to even know what that is, are being shoved up our nose, and that tells us whether or not we have this virus, even if we're not have an infection, even if we're not physically sick. Maybe you're still contagious, right? That was what we were told. In fact, those were non-specific. Those tests were made to find any tiny amount of a particle of any kind of coronavirus. So if I give you an analogy, say like the police want to find the Batmobile. So they're like, the Batmobile's around here somewhere, and we're going to use this test. And the Batmobile, we all know what the Batmobile is, very specific. So what they do is, we found a tire, okay? It's non-specific. We found a tire, and there are Batmobiles everywhere. We found many Batmobiles, right? So
I can tell you, in medicine, oftentimes the test is looking for something that is. Meaning you don't need something that says we found this specific thing. What you're looking for is, do we have this particle? And predominance of the people with this particular particle will have X or Y. I understand your point. You're saying that a non-specific tire can be for any car, not just for the Batmobile. And when they found the tire, they're saying, hey, we have the Batmobile here. I understand your point.
And everybody has, and then everybody has this. So what I'm saying, and again, this is, I was completely taken in when I was like going through this, but
everybody didn't have it. I never got COVID.
Hold on. What I found, I didn't. Supposedly I had Omicron, but I was fine. What what I'm saying is, if you simply take let's assume that the PCR is real and that COVID was real. Let's just assume it was real. If you take the normal way that is used for everything else to this day to quantify deaths, to certify a death, that protocol, and it has to be the only way you could do, you have to apply the same definition to everything. Otherwise, you're going to have, and none of it makes sense, right? So they took a completely different one. If you took that normal way and applied it to COVID-19, and I went through the CDC's death certificate data, which is all available online in a database called Wonder, about 90%, according to them, according to their data, would not be considered COVID deaths. Meaning, so that's the overwhelming majority. It would not be COVID deaths.
I hear you.
That was the first thing for me to get from completely agreeing with you to where I am today. I know we're not, we're going maybe longer than we planned.
No, you're fine.
This is a big question, but that was part of the National Security State Theater, is what I'm telling you. And I know, what I'm saying sounds crazy to a lot of people, but what I would ask you, Jamal, and your audience is to not immediately dismiss, because really no one else is saying this, and certainly not on Twitter or on right or left, or maybe it sounds more right wing. I don't know, whatever. Don't immediately dismiss it, because it's it might sound crazy, but
don't take this wrong, but a lot of people died, and you can say that they changed the mechanism. Fair enough, but they would have to change the mechanism all across the world. In Brazil, they would have had to change it in Israel. They would have had to change it in Russia, China, etc., where all of these people were also dying. I don't think that the FDA was operating in any of these other countries.
The World Health Organization issued, for one thing, the World Health Organization, a lot of different countries had a lot of different protocols. However, in particular in the West, the World Health Organization issued its protocols and guidelines, and actually wrote a piece not long ago showing that the figures who wrote the protocols for the World Health Organization were part of a basically massive lie to make the lab leak theory appear as if it were.
Oh, look, I don't doubt you on that. Fauci was full of shit. Agreed.
Fauci.
You could look at the emails that they were trying to hide and bury. Fauci was totally full of shit. We were totally in gain of function research.
No. What I'm saying, no. I'm saying that the lab leak theory is bullshit, and it was and is scripted National Security State Theater to make us think that it was the real narrative that they were hiding from us. What I showed in a recent piece, you can read this on my website, Uncaptured Media. I have my own site, uncaptured.media.
Yeah.
If you remember, this is going back to July 2020. There was a supposed Chinese whistleblower named Li Mengyan who came out on the Tucker Carlson show and said, so primetime Fox TV, this is not and said, COVID is a bioweapon. I just fled from Hong Kong, and I'm telling you that COVID was a bioweapon from a Chinese lab, and she, was then seen as she was the first lab leak whistleblower. She was the original lab leak whistleblower. And at that point, it was considered right wing and, maybe racist or whatever and they were calling it the China virus and all this stuff. What I found, and I show this in the investigation, is that Li Mengyan lied about who she was. She made it appear as if she had never been in the United States. She was actually married in the United States, and she is married into one of the most prominent families in the biomedical apparatus here in Washington in particular, whose work was substantially funded by Anthony Fauci's NIH. And
but this is why I don't believe every random thing that I hear on this stuff.
Well,
because
but this,
as you point out, narratives get created all the time.
But this was the narrative that was created. And now and at that point, everyone thought, no, it just, like respectable, people only, thought I probably, came from nature, a bat cave or whatever, and it was like considered right wing and racist maybe to say that it came from a lab, and it slowly became accepted especially because of scripted actors and social media. This is what I'm saying is like to tie this all the way back to the beginning of the conversation. The more that I'm going to say we, because I'm part of this too. The more that we consume social media and the more that we use it and think that we are good at it and that we are necessarily seeing the lies, like, and some of the lies are so obvious. The October 7th lies, the drones in Poland, these lies are so obvious to us. Other lies we get taken in by. And it's very, extremely difficult to know. And especially when it becomes like our profession, that like we're like, this is what we do professionally. This is what we devote our lives to, all this stuff. It's really easy to get taken in. And then, when your job depends on it, I'm sure you've heard the quote, never try to convince a man of something upon which his,
job depends upon him not believing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's that kind of thing. So like, we become part of the script and we don't even know it. I'm not saying that, you tomorrow you have to accept, what I'm saying, everything about COVID, just because I'm telling you. What I'm saying is like, please have an open mind. Please take this stuff into consideration and go check it out. Go into the rabbit hole, look at some of the stuff I've published, interview this cat, Jonathan J. Cooey, on this stuff. Ask him, how did you get in touch with RFK? Why did he, interview him, ask him every question.
He's one guy against, that's like saying somebody ran an experiment. The person came up with a result, but nobody else came up with a result. Is he right? He could be. Am I going to believe one random guy? This is kind of what
everybody in the media, basically everybody said Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. That at that point you were crazy if you didn't say that. Everybody said,
as I pointed out, he could be right.
I'm not saying you have to blindly accept him. I'm not even saying you have to say he's the most important guy. I'm telling you my opinion that I think he's one of the sharpest minds in the country and is a real basically a threat to the system, and that's why we haven't heard of him. That's why he's not invited on big podcasts. That's also in part he doesn't try to engage with social media because he sees it as a theater. Yeah, because it's like, so it's very, very easy to be co-opted into the script, and it's like when you step into the matrix, whatever, it's hard to know what is organic, what is inorganic, what's fake, and all of a sudden, I'm telling you, that happened to me. I really
all of us. Honestly, it is very difficult to find the floor. Agreed. And it is easy to, let's say, fold ourselves in the narratives one way or the other.
Exactly.
So I agree with you on that point. I do agree.
I'm just saying all this stuff needs to be re-examined, and like the fact that what happened in COVID is considered like kind of, that's old news, that's a long time ago. That is part of the multi-generational plan that we are living through, of how that restructured society and carried out all kinds of things that most people are not even aware of, but a lot of people suffered from in a multitude of ways. And to say that was like, well, that was like years ago. Yes, it was, but our society has been completely restructured since then, and it's still extremely relevant. So I know, like right now, Gaza and Ukraine and Charlie Kirk are like more front and center in our minds, but we have to be thinking in not only like reacting to the headlines and what's happening, but longer term.
And we can end it on this, but I think from your point of view, this is kind of like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Like the ramifications go for decades. I mean, we're still dealing with the ramifications of this kind of project for New America that was kicked off by Bush lying us into a war.
They just got Syria, a few months ago.
Yeah. After 20 something years.
Yeah.
And I think your point is like the restructuring of the state and the way that COVID has affected all of this it will have long-term repercussions, and that our assumptions for it need to be re-examined. I do get the point. I'm not discounting you. I don't want you to think that I'm just blowing you off. I'm not. I do get where you're coming from with it, where you're the point that you're making associated with it. Like in the same way that media can kind of get on a bandwagon and run with a particular thing, and people have a certain idea of the world. Well, the same thing would be true for the way COVID was introduced and the way that we dealt with this thing that was introduced. No, I get it. I do get it. I'm not discounting you. I swear to God, I'm not.
I get it. I get it. And like, honestly, people react strongly to it because it's an emotional thing. People are like, yeah, like I know people that died. Like my people are like, I know people that died around me, my whatever, like, so it's not just like a passing headline or whatever. It's a personal thing. We all lived through, people went through crazy isolation or this or that, or maybe they lost their job or whatever it is. So I'm not saying, I don't, take like offense to people being like, what? That sounds crazy, man. What are you saying? All I'm saying is like,
just be clear. I never said that.
I'm not.
I patiently listened. Just gave you that.
No, okay. I don't even blame you. Okay, you had a minor reaction. I don't blame you for that. I'm not even saying that. I'm not blaming you for that at all. I'm saying everybody has a really. It's like, look, it's like me telling you that the Earth,
it's flat.
Is flat,
But I have a much stronger reaction if you told me that.
In this case, how I see it is like everyone believes the Earth is flat, and I'm saying actually it's round, and people are like, what? Like, are you crazy? So everybody's, I like it, if I sound crazy to people, and I accept that and I understand that, but if you really take the time and look through this stuff, because like when that death certificate stuff, I was like, wait a minute. So I mean, I spent like several weeks going in depth.
This would be a much longer conversation. I disagree with so many of the premises that I think you're running with, and as somebody who has had to deal with the medical community for a very long time and used to do stuff like look up medical data, and then when you talk to a medical professional, you realize, oh, I'm getting this wrong because of my methodology, the way I'm thinking, the way I'm framing about it, the context that I'm setting it. It's not the way that they are thinking about it in the medical field, in the medical industry. So I am skeptical, but I don't discount what you're saying. I mean, God, man, there's so much random shit out here that could happen and that could be true. That is, I can't completely discount some of what you're pointing out. So no, I'm not. I might have a reaction to it because, when at the radio station, we covered the deaths every day. We had professional doctors on every other day talking about the number of people who were dying, the people around them that were dying, the people who were, I don't believe in COVID, and yet they're in the hospital dying from COVID. Like, I feel you. I get you. I understand where you're coming from. I get where you're coming from. I just disagree. You may know more about this than I do. Like, as you pointed out, you have looked further into it than I have. So I can't discount what you've found. And I won't discount what you found. I'm just skeptical.
And that's, what? Skepticism is the way to be, 100%, to be skeptical of everything. So, I mean,
but I don't want you to think that I discounted you. That's the point.
No. I don't, not at all. I don't think that. It's like I said, it's, most people, if I tell them my opinion or my analysis or whatever, it's totally counterintuitive. It's completely against like everything they have been thinking of what happened from 2020 to 2022 or whatever, or from 2020 on, and how, so like I don't even if you were like, Dan, like like if you said like, Dan, I think you're out of your mind,
I wouldn't say that. I would never say that.
No, I'm not saying you would. I wouldn't get offended. I would be like, okay, I understand. Like, let me break down why I think that. You know what I mean? Like, and that's anybody. So no,
I try not to be addicted to my guests. I mean,
it's
and look,
all
I was the UFO guy at my network, right? So I'm sympathetic to.
Yeah, no, and I know, no, man. I'm happy to, drink a beer with you and talk and whatever. Like, I'm happy to come back on the show. It's all good. There's no.
I would love to have you back on the show.
Yeah, we'll do it.
I really would. I really would. Dan, fantastic conversation. I didn't realize it was going to go here, but I don't know where all of my conversations is going to go. I don't like to have overly scripted conversations. I like kind of it to start at a particular point and just kind of evolve the way it is. Thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. I like I said, this is the first time on the show. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to you. I don't think on here or at the radio station. So I'm glad to finally get this opportunity where our schedules can meet up.
Definitely. No, I'm glad to come on. I appreciate you having me on. And I mean, if I had come on 6 months ago or a year ago, my analysis probably would have been quite different. It's everyone's evolving all the time, and my understanding, what I emphasize now and what I'm thinking about all the time is like how is like looking at this stuff in not only in like the daily headlines, like I said, but like the longer term, like what is the kind of bigger agenda at play? What are they trying to do? I mean, the thing I didn't mention at the very beginning, not to go back into it, but like what you asked me about at the beginning is like what I think we're in this strategy of tension, and they're trying to have left right. They're trying to create this, inflame this artificial left-right divide, black, white, trans, not trans, whatever kind of divide they can among the American populace to, turn people against each other so they can roll out more of the preconceived, multi-generational agenda. And so I suspect that the Charlie Kirk thing is really about that. And if you look at what is being said on, CNN, on Fox News, it's all, this is war, outrage, we need to, it's not, and my message is go talk to your neighbor, like this civil war, they want to project it into reality so then people partake in it. So, get off social media, go talk to your neighbor, even if they voted
for real world.
Yeah. I went to a farmer's market. It's like, people are like, oh, we have a civil war in this country. And I go to a farmer's market here in DC at Eastern Market yesterday. And Capitol Hill, it's like, what Capitol Hill is like. It's like,
I live there.
Oh, okay. You live in Capitol.
Well, I used to live there.
Okay.
But yeah.
But like, it's kind of an interesting mix at the farmer's market because it's very multiracial. And you have a bunch of people from kind of the country who are bringing their farm produced products to sell, and like everybody's cool, and like you can't tell who voted for what, and it doesn't matter, and they're just like, people are having a good time and it's all good, everyone's just being normal. Like, that's America. That's what
I gotta be honest, I love those farmers markets. They're so chill.
Yeah, they're great. I had the best coffee I've ever had yesterday, and I'm like, man, this is so much better than like watching Alex Jones be like, oh, this is civil war, these leftist terrorists. I'm like, this is what they want to destroy. They want somebody.
I mean, that's how they make profit.
Exactly.
I mean, like if you let's say for example, you do a YouTube video and you put good conversation with Dan Cohen about COVID.
Right.
That video is gonna get one view.
Right.
That video is gonna get one view. Or if you say climate change is something. Right. One view. If you say war with so and so, okay, that's going to get an uptick. It's like you're incentivized.
And you have to put like Dan Cohen exposes in caps.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like,
that shit is aggravating. But
and
that's
it's like me like calmly talking about whatever, and I'm like, well, and it's just like, okay, so it's all just like outrage, emotion. It's like that's the theater. That's how we're getting played against each other.
it's some of the stuff is just capitalistic commodification in a way that people make their profits.
Exactly.
And some of it is, I agree, scripted. Dan, man, thank you for this. And just so the audience will know, Dan Cohen, journalist, filmmaker, who contributed to Al Jazeera English, Alternate, Electronic Intifada, The Gray Zone, Middle East Eye, Mondeweiss, The Nation, Vice News, Mint Press. You also have, for some reason, I don't think it's Substack. You have your own.
It is. I have it on Substack, though. I want to migrate it to like a totally independent platform. But yeah, my own outlet called Uncaptured Media. So I'm not as active there as of late. I drop investigations from here to there, but because I'm working on a documentary that's consuming all my time. But uncaptured.media. So yeah, you can follow me there, and
Dan, I have appreciated this conversation, man. I like opposition, and my point is like, because opposition makes you defend a point of view. It makes you it clarifies sometimes your own point of view, because you could be wrong. Like I accept just a man getting old, but I could be wrong. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
100%. Thank you, Jamal. Speak soon.
Have a good one. Bye-bye. All right. We've had a damn good show today. Is he on Discord? He said uncaptured.media was the location that he was on. And I think he said he was also on Substack. But looking for something. But he said he doesn't necessarily put too much on Substack. So, but shout out to Dan. Obviously I disagree, but individuated unit of consciousness. Bro, Christy Nome was hot before Homeland Security. She is an attractive woman. I can't believe this woman is a grandma. Cannot believe this woman is a grandma. Let's say a grandma. Yeah. Shout out to Christy Nome. Whatever vampiric preservation formula that she's had, she's put that shit in a bottle, big time. Let's see. This is Leslie Brown. Welcome to the family, Leslie Brown. Thank you. Welcome to the family. And we have Kwame Binta, Spirit Warrior. I love that name, Spirit Warrior. Thank you, Kwame. Thank you for that. All right, we have come to the end. I'm going to go downstairs and get some rice because I'm dragging ass. I want to thank all of you for joining me. I appreciate all of you on this. You all know in advance I'm a hard ass on COVID. So when that conversation came up, my point of view, where my point of view was going to go. But look, I don't have any feelings per se about it. Short of, like, we used to do segments on COVID. We used to get into fights on COVID, like hardcore, like Kim Iverson. Oh God, man, that shit was war on COVID on the radio station. We used to have doctors come on that would go through and explain how this stuff worked. They tend to be honest. I mean, in fact, one of them kind of repudiated his own organization. I think he was working at NIH. Yeah, man, people were dying across the world. So even if it was changed, the FDA saying, hey, we need you to put COVID in the thing. Okay, well, if COVID is an underlying case and somebody dies of something else, I mean, it's still COVID. I don't know. I'm not going to get into a pissy match on that because I don't know the research that he went into. So I can't necessarily overly contradict it, but I know people are dying. In fact, people are dying. That's on some level validating the existence of the thing that we're talking about. All right. I'm going to call it a day. Charlotte Ruse, doctors, paid creeps by pharmaceutical companies. You are not going to get me to defend doctors. You just aren't. Whatever you feel for them, I can guarantee you that my rage outmatches yours on just past history. By the same token, I have no issue. I'm not. I've told you I thought cynicism is not a political point of view. It's like a clock being right that's fixed on a particular time frame. Political analysis is different. And I don't have any issue going to people to get information, whether I like those professions or not, especially if I think those people are just so happen to be right. Meaning, just because Hitler likes dogs doesn't mean I stop liking dogs, if that makes sense. All right, let's call it a day. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. You are a great audience. We had a really good crowd today. And I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 236. Signing off. Be safe. Be kind to the degree that you can be kind. I'll see you tomorrow.